here, pray tell. Um, well, thanks for having me here. I did provide an outline to you. Some of you have heard part of this talk before. The key thing I want to tell you is I do like questions. I do like comments in the middle, and you can take me where you want me to go. I don't have to stick to this, but Liz asked me to talk a little bit about master leasing. And of course, one of my big passions is property management. And so I've got something that puts a little of both of them together, but we'll probably get off the outline at some point in time. Let me start just by giving a definition of a master lease. Master lease is where I lease a property from Adrian Smoot and I sublease it to Kerry Cook. And I take a spread out of the middle of it. That's all it is. And you can do it in any number of different ways. I can do a performance lease that I agree to pay Adrian a percentage of what I receive from Kerry, so that if I don't receive anything, I don't owe him anything, or I can guarantee Adrian a fixed rent, whether the property is vacant or full. I can take on some or none of the expenses of operating the property, or anything in between. You can have some kind of a hybrid that gives a percentage plus a base rent. One of the wonderful things about it is the flexibility, that it's not a one size fits all. You can really use it to negotiate with people and see what do they need, give them what they need, see what's left, and then draft a contract that gives you everything that's left. So Adrian, do they have the outline that I sent or not? Has that been passed out yet?
I don't believe Liz sent that. I don't believe so, but it's on their screen if they.
Okay, so if they've got it on the screen, I don't see it on the screen.
See it on the screen?
That's fine. Well, it's probably there. I probably have it real small. Let me look. Oh, it is there. Great. Okay, very good. You guys, let me change what I've got then with that in mind. Bear with me 1 second here. Actually, okay. So, the key thing is, I gave you a couple of examples of people who have created great income streams with master leasing. I think it's a wonderful way to get into this business. Why? Because most of us aren't born with $5 million in our checking account. We start with pretty much nothing. And I can tell you the way I started, I bought what I could afford to buy, and it was really junk. The first house we bought, I think it cost me $28,500. I was pushed, pulled, and dragged into buying it with a friend of mine. And we took it subject to a low interest 8% VA loan. And I think we used our credit cards to come up with a down payment. That's not a house I want to hold on to forever. I don't own that anymore. That was a little tiny 800 square foot house that couldn't afford carpet anywhere in the house. All it had was vinyl flooring. It had a 1-car garage on the outside. On the inside, someone had raised the floor, put sheetrock right over the garage door, and shot a popcorn ceiling with speckles in it, and put a conical fireplace in it. And that was the fireplace. That was the family room, but it didn't even have any windows in that room. So the nice thing about master leasing is you don't have to start at that level. You can start dealing with the types of properties that are going to appeal to the types of tenants you want to do business with. And I'm here to tell you that learning how to deal with tenants is the whole name of the game, I think, in the real estate business. Yes, you can hire managers to run your stuff, but no one cares about your money more than you do. And you really, even if you're gonna pass it off to someone else down the road, you need to understand the management business, I believe. I think that if you don't know the management business, you really are ending up inventorying property for those of us who do. Management really, you'll find if you learn how to do it, it's the lazy man's way of being in the real estate business, because there are very few moving parts. It doesn't take a lot of time. We, at our high water mark, I mean, we didn't have a big operation. We had a little over 100 houses we were running, but one person can do that. And my goal was to make my gross income become my net income. And the way you do that is you get very streamlined and you don't have a lot of overhead. And you can do that through management. It can work pretty well. And you clearly don't need to run 100 properties. But let me start with the outline. The next thing I have in there is you can achieve the financial freedom without taking on debt. And I've given you several examples. One of the best ones that I know of is John Kane and Laura Brand. And they came to Colorado with just a pop-up camper. And they ended up well, right around Lake Dillon. And they decided they'd start master leasing, and they master leased properties both as vacation rentals and long-term rentals. And they told me several years ago, the last time I saw them, that they were making $20,000 a month running, master leasing other people's properties. Well, you know, in most parts of the country, you can survive pretty well on $20,000 a month with very little overhead. And they did, and they can snowboard and hike and do all the outdoor activities that they like. For those of you who are on Cashflow Depot, and those of you who aren't on cashflowdepot.com, I'll put that out to you as a site you might want to look at. But John and Lauren did a seminar for Jackie Lang, who runs that site in Panama a number of years ago. And if you go on that website, you can see their video, and it's excellent. And I will tell you, the site is a subscription site, but it's very reasonably priced. And I actually bought a lifetime membership for it because I wanted my kids to be able to access it. Have they ever done it? I'm not really sure. But it's a site that was created by Chris Miller and Jackie Lang to host a lot of Jack Miller's material. And Jack was probably the broadest educator in the business. He's no longer with us now. For those of you who didn't have the opportunity to hear him, you know, I'm sorry. He was well worth hearing, but a number of his courses are still on there. He has 2 options courses that I highly recommend. So it's a site I think you ought to maybe look at it if you haven't looked at it. And I suspect a number of people on this meeting tonight are members there. But anyway, John Kane and Laura Brand are 2 of the folks that changed their whole lifestyle just through master leasing. Matt Funk's right in Tampa, so he's right next door. And he printed my manual for my seminar for 2 years in a row, came to my seminar the second year, went back, sold his printing company, started master leasing properties while I raised 2 young kids out of his house. His wife was working. She was selling audio visual equipment and working around his swimming pool. He set up a business, replaced his income, replaced a bunch of his wife's income, and really has a great lifestyle. He does a lot of master leasing. He is also a licensed Florida real estate broker. So he has the opportunity of saying, well, you can have the A plan or the B plan. Either we'll manage your properties as your agent, or we'll lease your properties as a master tenant. And a little bit further in this talk, you'll hear kind of the differences between them, because there's a very significant difference. Jan Leisure is a good friend of mine out in Pebble Beach, California. And a number, you know, sometimes in the real estate cycle, properties are not saleable at any price. And Pebble Beach is a high-priced area where they have multi-million-dollar properties. And there were several that were listed, and she went to the owners of 9 properties in Pebble Beach and said, tell you what, why don't you lease me your properties on a month-to-month basis while you're selling them? And all you have to do is give me 60 days advance notice, and I'll cancel my leases and you can sell the properties. But in the meantime, you'll lose less by leasing it to me on a month-to-month basis than you're losing right now with vacant properties. So she moved in a bunch of furniture and subleased these properties out as vacation rentals, and she made $84,000 in 6 months. I think the first thing to tell you is I've never done that. Most of these guys have all done things I haven't done, but the concept, I listed them all just to show you the tremendous different things you can do with master leasing. You can do only as much as your mind allows you to kind of perceive. Wayne Talley's a guy in Bonita Springs, Florida, and he was a sales agent to sell off condos in this project. And most of the condos down here in Southwest Florida, you can't lease short term. You have to lease them for 3 months at a time, and sometimes a limitation of only once or twice a year. Well, his building, you could lease short term. And most of the people that bought units in that building were buying them for future retirement time. And so they'd love to lease them in the shortfall. And Dwayne said, okay, the way you get in the leasing pool is we have a master lease. We lease your properties and turn around and sublease them. And he told me that between Christmas and Easter of one year, he generated $140,000. I don't really know if that was gross or net, but it's still a very significant figure. And once more, I have to say, I have never done that. My son-in-law, Kurt Elmas, supports my daughter and 3 kids master leasing single-family houses. He was a sports writer, and he was moved around with a number of newspapers, and he ended up in Pocatello, Idaho. And we brought him back to Colorado Springs one fall to see the family before we took off for Florida, because we are in Naples. Actually, we're here 8 months of the year and 4 months in Colorado Springs. So they came to Colorado Springs, and we had a nice time with them. And I took them back to the airport at about 6 a.m. one morning. And on the way to the airport, Kurt said, you know, we'd like to buy another rental house in Colorado Springs. And I said, well, I think Colorado Springs is a good place to do business. And then he said, well, you know, actually, we think we want to move back here. And I said, well, it was a great place for us to raise a family. What would you do? And then my daughter chimed in and she said, Dad, you have no idea, but we've been up all night talking and we want a hostile takeover of your company. And my response had to be, there's not much to take over. So not ever wanting a partnership anymore with anyone else. I think partnerships start with great ideas, but they don't often end with happily. The only partnership I want is with my spouse, and we've been married 46 years, so I think maybe that one will work. But we did helped him set up an LLC and get in business, and he started, so he had a parallel company. We had a company and he had a company. And he started master leasing properties, and it's worked very well. I mean, he has a motor home, he has a very nice lifestyle. Since he's into every sport known to man, he teaches his kids on all the sports, be it baseball or basketball or all of those things. And I think the lifestyle is pretty neat. And that's one of the wonderful things about this real estate business, in that, you know, if you're an entrepreneur and you work for yourself, it clearly doesn't mean you're not going to work as hard. You're going to work a lot harder in all probability. The difference is it's not going to be work. It's going to be fun. I found it hard to stop working. When I first moved to Florida for the first year, it was really tough for me because I wanted to do deals, and yet I really didn't want to buy anything in Naples, Florida. Naples being a real resort area that people are here only roughly 4 to 5 months a year. You know, if you have a decent property that's free and clear, you can spend 6 months income just to pay the taxes and the insurance if you can get the insurance. So, you know, my properties are all in Colorado Springs, and that's where I prefer to do business. Peter Fortunato, if there's anyone on this call that has not heard Peter Fortunato, I know he's coming to talk to you in a month or so, but he is a national treasure. And since he lives right down the road from you and he does seminars in Tampa, if you haven't been to him, gee whiz, make sure you go to him, because all of us are getting longer in tooth and we're not going to be here forever. And Peter is one of the best of the best. But he has a picture of a house, for those of you who haven't seen it, and he draws out different sections of that property and showing all the benefits that a single family house can offer. And so this next section of my notes goes through how you can get some of the benefits of real estate by master leasing without ever owning the property. So just kind of going through it, income's pretty simple to see. If I lease something from Bruce Queck and sublease it to Gary Cook on a performance basis, and I'm leasing it to Gary for more than I'm paying Bruce, obviously I'm going to get the income. The tax benefits. Well, first of all, a master lease is passive income. And and if you compare being a master tenant versus being a property manager, just compare that for 1 second. If you're a property manager and you're managing someone's property, forgetting the fiduciary responsibility and all the other aspects of it, just looking at the monetary aspects for a moment, management income is earned income. And earned income from a federal standpoint, if you have $100,000 of master leased income compared to $100,000 of property management income, the master lease income at a federal rate is taxed at a little over $19,000 versus the property management income is $31,000 and change. What's the difference? And I will say this is based on a tax return a couple of years ago, so the numbers may have changed slightly, but the percentages still work out, and it's still very, very dramatic. So what's the difference? Well, earned income is subject to self-employment tax, which essentially is 15%. So if a fee manager did nothing other than change the title of his management agreement from management agreement to lease and did very little else, they've just given themselves a significant increase in their net income right off the bat. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning, but I'll mention it again. If someone wants to ask a question or take me off course at some point on here, make sure that someone flags me. Either, I can't see all your pictures, but I know there's a chat section, and hopefully someone's monitoring that, and Adrian or someone will bust in and tell me to be quiet so we can take the questions, because I really do like that. And I like it when you disagree with me. So, take me on when you deem it's appropriate. Now,
okay, I'll monitor it for you, David.
Tax benefit. Great, thanks. When you look at tax benefits, if you own real estate, you get to write it off, right? You get to depreciate it. Well, how long does that take? Generally speaking, most people depreciate their real estate over 27 and a half years, meaning residential real estate. They can go 40 years straight line, but most times it's 27 and a half years. But they can't depreciate the land. Whereas if you lease the property, every dime you pay out, every dime is an expense, a management expense. It's just like painting the house. It's just like management fee. It's just one of the operating expenses. And so you get to write off 100%. So it's very, very efficient. And it's not an alternative minimum tax preference item. And there's no recapture depreciation when you sell it. So there's some major benefits, I think, that master leasing can provide from a tax standpoint. From a profit standpoint, you can sell or sublease your master lease. I had some folks who took my class, and they came to me and they said, we really want to do business with you. And they had an underutilized bookkeeper, and they'd like to keep him a little busier, like to generate some more income, but they really wanted me looking over their shoulder, fine-tuning their business without nickel and diming them. And I gave them my normal statement that I don't do partnerships. I really don't want to do that. But for 6 months, we kicked it around, and I came up with this kind of a Rube Goldberg machine way of doing business. And so what we did is I leased my business to them. So either Tilney or Keeper Corporation leased properties from owners. Then if Tilney leased the properties, then Tilney would sublease them to Keeper Corporation. Then Keeper Corporation would sublease them to Caravan Properties. Caravan Properties would deal with the tenants and the receivables and payables, and Tilney would deal with the owners. But Tilney was the conductor of the band. They had to use my paperwork. They had to do it my way. And if they blinked, they did anything wrong, I could pull the leases back and do something else with them. And that was a much better way of doing business, in my opinion, because I didn't give up the control. So you can do that kind of things. There's a story that Jack Miller told me years ago, and we were really good friends. He had a good friend, Joe West, and Joe West was a retired fireman from Mississippi. And Joe sent Jack a deed one day, to a house or to a partial interest in a house, 50% interest. And Jack calls up Joe and says, "Why did you send me this deed?" And Joe said, "Did I send you that deed?" And Jack said, "Yeah, you did." And he said, "Well, boy, that serves me right. You just keep that deed and send me $5,000 or whatever the heck it was that it took to either take subject to or with owner financing." And so Jack gave Joe a check, and things go on for a while. And all of a sudden, Joe calls Jack up and says to Jack that, "Jack, I am the pits when it comes to managing property. And would you mind terribly if I, out of my portion of the rental proceeds, hired a manager to run the property?" And Jack said, "No, if it's your money, I could care less. Do whatever you want." So what did Joe do? Joe deeded 25% of the property, meaning half of his half, to someone else to manage the property. So he's totally out of it. He has no money in it at all, and he's getting the income from it. Jack paid the down payment. This other guy's doing the management, and Joe owns 25% of it. There's nice things you can do if you know how to
Brilliant.
manage. Management really, I've said long ago, if you can do something that other people don't want to do, you'll do well. I mean, plumbers do well by and large. You find something that folks don't want, and management, people don't want to do it because they think tenants and toilets. They think that's the one thing you don't want to deal with. And I can just tell you, my experience is very different. My experience is that there's good tenants and there's bad tenants. And most of you here in this meeting have all been tenants at some point in time in your life. And if you were a bad tenant, you certainly don't want to do business with people like you. But what you do need to do is have good screening procedures so that you can find the types of folks with the right moral code, that have the job skills, that understand that you share expectations with them, and they will be good stewards of your assets. We really don't believe that our houses are our biggest asset. We really believe our tenants are our biggest asset. Now, why is that? Well, if any of you have ever read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you realize assets are supposed to feed you and liabilities are supposed to eat you. Think about it for a second. Vacant houses don't feed you. They eat you alive for all kinds of costs. It's the tenants that feed you. And so, you have to understand the value of good tenants. And I would like to share a story of a class I took once that greatly impacted the way we run our business. I took a class from Ritz-Carlton once. And Ritz-Carlton is pretty unique in that they allow their employees to make one-off decisions on how to deal with guests to either solve a problem or make the guest stay more enjoyable. And this story, well, it went something like this. Young families vacationing at Ritz-Carlton. And I think it's parents and a young child. And they get ready to leave at the end of the vacation. And lo and behold, the little kid can't find his stuffed animal. And so the hotel turns everything upside down, and lo and behold, they can't find the stuffed animal, and the kid tearfully goes home with his parents. Well, a little while later, Ritz-Carlton found that the stuffed animal got wrapped up in the bed sheets, and they discovered it in the laundry. And so rather than just going above and beyond and shipping it back to the little kid, they took the stuffed animal and they took it out around the swimming pool, and they put it on a chaise longue and took its picture sitting out by the pool. And they took it to the dining room and sat it at a table and took its picture with all the plates and silverware in front of it. And they took it to various places of the hotel. And then when they shipped it back to the little boy, they put a handwritten note in it saying, your stuffed animal, just his vacation he wasn't ready to leave yet. And so this kid gets the stuffed animal back with all these great pictures, and that kid would not allow his parents to take a vacation at any other place for the next X number of years. They created a sticky client that would come back to Ritz-Carlton. That's what you want to do with your tenants. You want them to not want to move out of your properties. You want them to be there forever. And so I just share that with you because I think it's really important. How can you get growth? Well, I can tell you in 1984, I leased a house for 35 years at a fixed rent. And I secured my lease with a deed of trust, which essentially said that if the owners failed to pay the underlying encumbrances and taxes and insurance, I could foreclose them. 10 years into that 35-year lease, I finally conned a tenant into buying the house. And the owner said, well, you get all the appreciation from the time you put your lease on the property. And I said, no, there's too much. Let's split it. And so we did split it. And I'm here to tell you that that's the way you have long-term relationships, and that's how you'll do future deals. I've done a lot of transactions with this particular individual. He's no longer with us now, but because I leased that from him for 35 years when he was 59 years old. And so one of the first questions that usually comes up is, why would someone 59 years old give me a fixed lease for 35 years? Don't let your perceptions of what people will do influence you in talking to folks. You want to find out what their needs are and what they want. And when you go to meet with an owner, you really got to spend a lot of time listening to them and asking them questions rather than blindly throwing darts at a dartboard in the dark by offering them, this is what I'll do. You don't want to do that. And you also don't want to give them, in my opinion, one offer. You'd much rather have, do you want this type of a transaction or this other type of a transaction? It's instead of allowing them to say yes, no, it's which one. So with this particular individual who was a friend of mine, we were at lunch one day. And he said, I've got this house I want you to take on. I want you to manage it. And I said, tell me about the house. And he told me, and I said, it's the wrong house. Get me another house. And he said, you don't understand. I took this house back in foreclosure and I don't want the joys of managing it anymore. And I said, I don't either. So we talked about it a little bit, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you two possible transactions I'll do. Number one, I'll lease option it for 10 years. Or the second one is I'll lease it for 35 years. Now, which one makes the most sense? Well, this particular individual, he was in the note business, and so his income came in dribs and drabs of principal and interest. And he was eating his principal as his payments came in. And he had, portfolio income. Note income is the toughest type of income to be able to shelter. So we determined it might make sense for him to still show that he's entitled on this house. I wasn't doing his tax return. He wasn't doing my tax return. And maybe he got some economic benefit of keeping the property on his tax return. So I leased it from him for 35 years at a fixed rent. But there was another motivation that he had that I would never have thought of. He had 3 adult sons, and he really was convinced that the moment he dropped dead, they'd all buy something red that drove very fast. And he loved the idea that he could control from the grave, that they got, in this case, they got $375 a month for the rest of the 35-year period. So that's how that transaction took place. But the key thing I want to tell you is, by having a long-term lease well secured, I believe in most cases you actually have a stealth option. Because yes, people can sell the property, but most people who buy single-family houses want rights of possession. And if you've got a lease, they don't have rights of possession unless they come talk to you and get you to decide to remove your lease in some fashion. So I think you can certainly get the growth that way. Now, I've also received the cash flow and appreciation from a 10-year master lease option. What's the difference? When would I do a lease option and when would I do a straight lease? Let me walk you through that real quickly. I find that people have no idea the value of good leases. They just have no idea, and they don't see it when you're negotiating with them, what they're giving up. If you ask for a lease option, in most cases, people perceive you've got more than a lease, and they either want to charge you something in terms of option consideration, or else they want to charge you higher monthly rent payments. I want to get in as cost effectively as I can, so most times I will start out with a straight lease. Someone needs to mute, I think, and then further negotiations will take place down the road. At some point in time, all properties get sold. And if I've underpromised and overperformed on my lease, I'm the one they want to talk to. Now, when would I do a lease option right off the bat? I do a lease option right off the bat when people don't want to lease it to me, they want to sell it to me. And in that case, I look them in the eye and I say, congratulations, you've just sold your property. Here's how we're going to do it. I'll make you payments and 10 years from now we'll close. And I'll do a lease option. So it depends on the owner, not on me, as to kind of how I'm going to set that up. And we'll kind of, you know, we'll walk them down that funnel to find out what their needs are. Management. Obviously, it gives you the joys of management if you like management. I like management. I really enjoy it. There's so many benefits of management that people don't perceive. For example, I'm 69 years old. Most folks, as they get older, you know, they've retired, they get more cut off from people. I have people I can talk to regularly, my tenants. And when I talk to my tenants, it's very positive. It's not negative. I look forward to them. For if there's any gray-haired people on this meeting, you'll know the expression that I feel like the Maytag repairman, my phone never rings. And that's largely true because my tenants are really my on-site resident managers who take care of most of the things in my properties. But when they call, I enjoy talking to them. They're wonderful people. So I really do like the management, and no one can force me out of that business. It's my decision when I want to quit. You do get the right of use of a property if you've leased it. Of course, you totally mess up the ability to sublease and take some income from it. An example of that would be young Pete Fortunato. He master leased or intended to master lease a wonderful house on the water in St. Petersburg. And he had a great transaction of, I think it was a 10-year fixed lease. And the problem was once he signed the lease, he decided he liked the house so darn much he moved into it. And so he did not sublease it out. But so you certainly can have the right to use if you want. Amortization. The only way you can get the amortization is if you couple a lease with an option on the owner's equity. So as the owner pays down their debt, you're getting that benefit. So in other words, your option says upon the payment of X number of dollars, you take over title to the property. So the longer you can hold out doing that, the owner is amortizing that debt for you. Security. You probably don't realize this, but master leases can be borrowed against. Good master leases, well secured, they're a very good asset. You know, I didn't mention it before, but the IRS says that if you have a leasehold interest that's 30 years or longer, you own the property. You can depreciate it. Well, in the example I gave you of my 35-year lease, what's my basis that I get to depreciate? There is no basis. Every dime I'm paying, I'm writing off as I pay that money as a management expense. Could I have paid something up front for that 35-year leasehold interest? Yes. Could I have prepaid a certain amount and claimed that a basis? Yes. But I find that many times with a lease, you don't have to do that because people just don't understand what they're giving you. They just don't have a clue. If you master lease a property, well, no, let me say this another way. All I can do is tell you that not every house that I've bought over my career, and the first house I bought was in 1978, not everyone has been a good rental. I've had some real terrible transactions. I mean, I lost $50,000 on one house one time. So they don't all work great. You don't really know how the house is going to work as a rental until you've test driven it a little bit, until you've had it. The problem is if you buy it, now you got to get out of title. And you know, there's all kinds of things that mess it up. In Florida, you got things like sinkholes. In Colorado, you got drainage issues. We have bentonite that if water hits this clay soils, it grows to 300% of its volume and it will push the foundations around and cause all kinds of problems. We have many finished basements in our houses. And if you have a drainage problem, that's a real problem if you're getting water in the basement. You can have a neighbor problem. We've had problems with neighbors with a bunch of dogs where the only solution I had ultimately was to sell the property. I couldn't keep people in there long term. It was a problem. So again, one of the things I like about master leasing is I think it allows you to test drive the properties before you buy. It's almost like you're at a car dealership and they let you take the car around the corner and drive it. You get to check the property out and decide what you think. Most people say the problem with just doing a lease initially is you don't have anything else. Yes, you do. The lease gives you the opportunity to essentially whittle and rock with the owner, to get to know them and gain their trust. And the longer time you have spending with them, doing more than you say you'll do, faster than you say you'll do it, the more they trust you. And so, you know, the master lease is only the first negotiation. It's not your last negotiation. You have this opportunity to keep talking over time. And really, you know, if you think about it, every property is sold at some point in time, and your master lease gives you some control. Now, if you talk about the length of time, minimum length of time you want on a master lease, it would it always depends. It always depends on the property. But I'll give you an example. If I'm dealing with a homeowner that's moving out of the community because of a job situation, and they're not willing to sell their property because they don't want to cut the cord, they may want to come back, then I want a lease probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 years minimum, or maybe 3 years with an option to renew, or some such thing. Why? Because believe it or not, in this country, there's an awful lot of single family houses that are actually free and clear. There's a lot of folks my age that haven't moved around every 5 years. They've actually paid off their debt. And now they are moving for whatever reason. And if I have a lease that eliminates the opportunity for them to use Section 121 of the Internal Revenue Code, which essentially says if it's a couple, they have up to $500,000 worth of gain, unrealized gain, and they sell their property, the IRS essentially pays that gain for them under 121 if it's their personal residence and they've lived in it 2 out of 5 years. It's $250,000 if it's an individual. So if I control the property for a longer time, that it eliminates their ability to have lived there the 2 out of the 5 years, they have to come to me if they want that economic benefit and negotiate my lease off earlier. So that would be something I would look at. I'd also tell you that in my business, I pretty much determined that I didn't want to take on any properties really for less than 3 years. It takes a little bit of effort to kick the tires and shake the property down and get it right and get the right tenant in there. And to do that, I want to be able to project that in future income stream I'm going to get for at least 3 years. And that was even when I did performance leases, which essentially went for a year at a time, but we'd have a discussion before I ever did business with the owner as to sharing expectations and how long they anticipated that they'd want to lease the house. If they wanted to do it for less than that, I'd say, don't lease it, sell it. You know, if you want to do it short term, you're going to be upset because you really ought to figure that when you come back, you're going to have to replace the yard. You're going to have to paint the outside and the inside of that property. You're going to need new floor coverings. You're going to have to do a lot of work to it. So it's much better for you to get rid of the problem now than to lease it short term. And that brings up one other thing, and that is that when someone would come to see me and they initially thought they were coming to see me to hire me and manage their properties, and they would find out that I wasn't for sale, they couldn't hire me, but that we might be able to do business, that it might be to their benefit and my business by doing it through the use of a master lease. I would count, they would think they were interviewing me. The key thing I want to tell you folks here is you need to be interviewing them. You don't want to do business with all owners. I started managing properties as an agent for owners in January of '81. And And I would tell you that the toughest part of my job was dealing with owners, never dealing with tenants. Why? Owners thought they owned the property and they wanted to pick up the phone and call you up and tell you what to do with it. They didn't realize that all you had was your time and your expertise. Now, one of the things that a master lease does that's very different from acting as their agent is you don't have a fiduciary responsibility to them, and your lease can control how much they can have interaction with you. If you have a lease that just guarantees to pay so much a month and take on a certain amount of the expenses, all they have the right from you is to get a check every month, and that's it. So you do have a lot more control, but just be aware that, this business may sound terrific, but you do want to screen the people you do business with. I almost think in many ways, you almost want to do credit reports on your owners as well as your tenants. You want to find out what their moral code is. How important is credit to them? Many of the properties that I'm leasing, would have a negative cash flow. And my marketing approach was, we'll lose you less than you're losing right now with a vacant house. Now I see Bruce Queck has a question, so I'm going to be quiet.
I guess that's the low-tech way of raising.
I saw your hand raised. Did you have?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
So,
did you have a question?
I do. So you've interviewed the owner, you've signed the lease, you're test driving the property, and now it's like, oh my God, wrong property, wrong owner. How do you get out of that?
Well, no, that's a really neat thing. How about if you bought the house? How would you get out of it? That would be really tough, wouldn't it? How about the guys that bought houses from, let's say, 2005 through 2007 and wish they'd never gone into title? They really had an Excedrin headache. If you have a lease on it, think about this. You get to create the lease. So you get to have an escape clause in there that under some terms and conditions, you can cancel your lease. Much easier to get out of a lease than it is to get out of title during certain times, in the real estate cycle. And I've had to do that. The very first escape clause I had, which was not terrific, but it worked. I said, after 36 months with 60 days advance notice and 1 month's additional payment as a lease cancellation fee, I'm out of here. And I exercised that. I think that Peter Fortunato's lease cancellation fee is much more effective. It says that anytime he doesn't make a payment, then all payments received to date shall be kept as full liquidated damages. All he has to do is not pay, period. He's out of there, no further liability. So you get to draft by design and not by default. And if you think about this for a second, if you're the master tenant, is your lease going to be pro landlord or pro tenant? Your lease with the owner.
Pro tenant, yeah. It'll be pro tenant.
I don't know. Pro tenant. And if you're dealing with your occupant tenant, is your lease going to be pro landlord or pro tenant?
That's right.
Pro landlord. Pro landlord.
Yeah.
So you're Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You've got two different contracts. And if you buy a house and you go to a closing, you sign someone else's paperwork. Whereas in this business, there is no paperwork, and you're a principal. So you can write your paperwork anywhere you want. You can write it. The deal I made for the 35-year lease, our initial transaction was written on a paper napkin at a restaurant. And then we memorialized it by writing it down in a better lease, and I secured it with a deed of trust. But that is a really major benefit, I think, of a master lease over going into title. If you can get most of the benefits of ownership without being in ownership, you think about it, a lot of us gray-haired guys that are on this call, we've spent a long time getting our names off of properties. We don't want people to know we own anything. And here, folks go into title and all of a sudden they have a bullseye on their back because it looks like they own stuff. So, and the laws are more and more pro-tenant. If the laws are pro-tenant, why don't you be a tenant? I'll give you an example of a pro-tenant law that really makes sense to, I think, master lease. And it has to deal with laws that California initiated last fall. California now has a law that says that if you've leased either on a month-to-month basis or on a fixed lease basis, a property for greater than 12 months, okay, and the property is a rental property and is going to be a rental property, then you may not be forced to terminate your relationship with that property unless the owner can show cause, meaning they have to renew your lease. And they have to renew your lease with no greater than a 3% increase plus the CPI for that town. So think about this for a second. I'm a master tenant, and now I have control of a property forever, essentially. They can't cancel my lease, can't cancel it. And they can raise my rent 3% plus the CPI in their town. But I'm really subleasing for more than I'm paying. And I still have the right, with the greater amount that I'm getting, to raise with my occupant tenant 3% plus the CPI. So my spread on income gets better over time. If you can see the math on that my income from my tenant is growing at a greater rate than my income to the owner. There's incredible things. Now, can an owner ever decide they want to move into the house and move you out? Yeah, they can. But what do they have to do under this current law? They have to give you 60 days advance notice. Within 15 days of giving you that notice, they have to write you a check equal to an amount equal to your current month's rent to help with your move. And you know, so as long as you have that same requirement with your occupant tenant, you're relatively safe. There's some great benefits in this business. Another question,
Dave,
or should we keep on going for now? Go for it.
All right, there's a little delay, so you'll have to bear with me here. The first question is, how do you get a landlord to sign a master lease?
Let me ask a question before I answer it. Are there any property management companies in the town where you are doing business? And I know the answer. I mean, in most cases, there are property management companies in the town where you are. So how do they get folks to sign a management agreement? The same way they get someone to sign a management agreement, you can get someone to sign a master lease. But you can run circles around them. Why? Because they have a one-size-fits-all. If someone calls them up, what do you suspect the very first question they ask when they're calling different management companies to decide who to hire because they don't want to deal with tenants and toilets? They ask them, how much do you charge? Whereas if they call you up, if you have a way of getting them to call you and they say, well, how much do you charge? You can say, well, it depends. Sometimes we don't charge anything at all. And sometimes we take care of all the monthly expenses up to stop loss. We need to get together because I need to find out a little bit more about your situation, and you need to find out a little bit more about what it is we think we do. When can we meet? Much better discussion. And then when you meet, instead of, you know, being a one size fits all, it's what are your needs? And the needs, you really have to look at the owner's needs, not what you can't go into it with a preconceived notion of what you're going to do. You know, master leasing should just be considered a tool in your real estate toolbox. It should not be considered the be all and end all. When you go and meet someone because you are aware that there's a situation, you don't know what the opportunity is, but something has come up. You've heard someone's going to be moving. You've heard maybe there's a divorce. You've got someone who's older who can't deal with stairs anymore, any number of different scenarios. But if you have a scenario, when you approach those folks, you don't know if you're going to buy the house. You don't know if you're going to lease the house. You don't know if you're going to loan against the property. You don't know if you're going to buy an option on the future upswing, or you shouldn't. You shouldn't go in saying, this is what we're going to do. You should go in asking questions and finding out their needs. Hopefully that makes sense. So since master leasing, in my opinion, is just a tool in the toolbox, I want you to consider adding it to your toolbox. So let's look at some of the reasons why I really like it. Number one, you don't need any money to get started. And that's a biggie. This is what we've told our kids to do. And I told you, one of my sons-in-law, I mean, he's done very well. Now, his goals are not to control 600 doors. And I don't think you have to control a ton of doors. He wants the master leasing to help them while they're building up their ownership. I don't believe at this point in time, they still have they had about 100 houses. I think they have less right now. And they want to maintain a lifestyle that works for them. They own a bunch of properties. They have options on properties. And the relationship of master leasing has brought them opportunities that they've been able to acquire properties over time. But not needing capital, that's a biggie. I mean, for many parts of the country, you know, it's hard for the next generation to get going. If you're in California where you've got an extra 0 or 2 on the value of the properties, boy, you just can't buy anything unless it's a cardboard box, essentially, or way inland someplace. Whereas master leasing, you can go after the good stuff, the good fruit, because you're not going to pay above market rent. You're going to take market rent and then come down from that in some figure that makes sense. There's a lot less risk than ownership. That's the example I gave you, that you think of the folks that bought properties before, you know, the 2008 to 2010 time period, that some of those folks are no longer in the real estate business. They lost it all. And some of them started over, but some of them did not. So you don't have that kind of a problem. I've already pointed out that you can draft by design and not by default. And that's very, very important. You really need to take that to heart. You can't, in my opinion, go to an attorney and say, give me a lease. He doesn't know your business. The only one who knows what your business is has to be you. So you've got to grind it out. You got to create something first. And then if you want to go to an attorney to see if he'll bless it, I would go to him and I'd say, can you defend this? And if you can't defend this, why not? And how can we make it so that you can make it defendable? But you've got to create your documents at first. I already pointed out that the income is passive. You know, I had the luxury of running about a $3 million note portfolio, parallel to a $3 million house portfolio for a number of years. The note portfolio was owned by a friend of mine who moved to Hong Kong. And you think about it, notes and rentals, they both produce income secured by property. That's what they do. They're both the same. But I'm here to tell you that I would much rather have the rentals than the notes. People think they want the notes. Why? Because they don't have to deal with tenants and toilets. But I would tell you that the notes are a much bigger problem. And let me give you some of the reasons why. The first thing is that at some point in time, notes wear out. Whereas if you maintain your properties will not only support you for your lifetime, but they'll support your kids for their lifetime. You can pass them down unless the government steals them from us, which looks like it's happening more and more. But so that's important. The notes, if interest rates drop way down, you get a call and someone says, if you won't renegotiate, I'm going to refinance and pay you off. Whereas on rent, and if the economy gets too tough, they leave the keys in the mailbox. And trust me, it takes longer to do a foreclosure and get title back to a property than it does to do an eviction. And you really don't have to do an eviction. You got to have a meeting with the tenant and say, how can I help you solve your problem? It's not my problem, but how can I help you solve your problem? Do I need a truck here in the morning to help load you up? Where's mom and dad live? What are you going to do? Because you can't stay here. And if you do stay here and we go through an eviction, it's going to mess up your credit. It's going to make it very difficult for you to rent anything down the road. So you can act much faster in a rental situation than you can in an ownership situation. The rents are generally hedged to inflation. Now, I tell you, they don't go up at an even curve. They bounce around, and sometimes they go down, and then they go up more dramatically at some point in time. But they do go up with inflation. The other thing I'd say is that if properties aren't selling, that means everyone's renting, so rents really do well. If properties are selling real well, that's a time to exchange out of the things you don't like into something that's a little better. But you know, the rents are well. Anyway, I like passive income you can shelter to a much better degree than you can portfolio income, which is note income. All rent paid by the master tenant is deductible. I already covered that. It works anywhere with the better houses than you can afford to purchase. Boy, that's a biggie. I mean, you want to determine what price point you want to deal with for tenants. And for me, it's essentially high-end blue collar, low-end white collar. Why? Because it's the biggest market segment that I can deal with people that have honor. And the white collar guy can come down without losing all of his self-esteem. And the blue collar guy who has a beer pocketbook and a champagne appetite, he can maybe rent the house and be there for forever. My longest tenant was with me for just under 25 years. My next longest one, 18 years. We've had lots of people long-term. Now my screen just changed. I just want to make sure, are we still, yeah, we're still here. Okay. Let's see, control property without ownership. We pointed that out already. Valuable leases can be borrowed against, subleased or sold. Little bureaucratic control. It's very different than property management. And let me cover why. In property management, you owe your fiduciary responsibility to your principal, the owner. And you're essentially supposed to take off your glasses, put on the owner's glasses, and work at maximizing the owner's bottom line. The conflict arises from the fact that you want to maximize your business income. And so there's that potential conflict of interest, which is why most states require licensing to be involved in property management. As a master tenant, you are an entrepreneur. You are not a property manager, and you cannot hold yourself out as a property manager. You can hold yourself out as a professional landlord. The only reason an owner of a property will lease his property to me is that if he sees that he can get a benefit from me that makes sense to him. And the only reason that I will lease his property from him is because I can get one or more benefits from him. And so this transaction takes place without agency involved. There's some other benefits to the owner, one being that the owners are not subject to vicarious liability. The rules of vicarious liability say that if an agent, while under an employment agreement with you, would be a property manager, essentially stubs his toe, does something wrong, and is hit with some kind of a liability situation, under the rules of vicarious liability, that flows right through to the principal. And the biggest case that, thing that comes to mind is fair housing. I long time ago heard of a situation where an on-site resident manager failed to lease to a family in an apartment complex in the Washington, D.C. area. And the owner was found guilty of violating fair housing to the tune of $2.41 million. Now that would really be an Excedrin headache. Whereas if the owner had leased his apartment complex to an individual and the individual had subleased and done something wrong, theoretically that should not have flown through to the principal. Okay, so there's some big benefits. Next one, no competition. How many of you know someone who's doing this? They just aren't. I mean, very few. Now, it's been done forever in the commercial market. Think WeWork, which isn't doing very well right now, but they lease all kinds of commercial office space and sublease it. And we always had executive workspace where someone would lease some commercial space and put a copier in there and some desks in this room and sublease it out. But you've got many other examples too. Most hotels, one outfit owns the ground and they lease the ground to the folks who build the hotel, and they own the people who build and own the hotel. Then the folks who own the hotel sublease the hotel to an operating company like Marriott for 10 years at a time. And Marriott may sublease the catering to someone else. So you have a whole series of different leases on that building. Some big master leases. Hong Kong was leased by the Brits from the People's Republic of China for 100 years, and then subleased to developers, who subleased to builders, who subleased condos and stuff to owners for 60-year land leases. So Hawaii is most of Hawaii is the land is owned by the benefits the Kamehameha schools. So this is not something new. What's new is considering doing it on single family houses. And you think about it, if no one's doing it, that's what you ought to consider doing. It was a great feeder for me to be able to end up in ownership on properties that I wanted to own, and yet to not get trapped on properties I didn't want to own. So I really think there's some real good benefits. It's a very low profile. If I record a deed of trust to secure my leasehold interest in the public records, I just look like a lender. And you think about that for a second. I don't have a bullseye on the back of my back. People don't see me that I own a bunch of stuff. I like that a lot. Negative cash flow property can provide you with positive cash flow. You really don't care what the debt service is. What you do care is that the owner is willing to pay the debt service and has the financial ability to pay the debt service, which is why I mentioned in some cases you may want to pull credit reports on owners that you lease from. One of our big marketing things, and I had a friend that I actually stole this from in Dallas, Texas. All of his marketing was, "We'll lose you less," because in his cases, at the time he was doing it, the rentals didn't make people any money. And you really think about it, an investor getting started usually doesn't make any money off of his rentals. Why? Well, he has somewhere between 30 and 40% operating expenses if he's lucky. If he has a multi-unit, it's going to be higher than that probably. Then he has his debt service, and then some have management fees on top of that. There's nothing for him. In the early years of ownership, until the income goes up from the rents and essentially his debt gets paid off, there's not a lot of cash flow for him. With master leasing, there's cash flow on day one if you negotiate right. Big benefit. I mentioned the test driving the properties before. Leases can be long-term. Yeah, they can. Now, I think in Florida, every state has different rules, so make sure you know what the rules are. I think if you do a lease for longer than a year, you need several witnesses on the lease. We always get all of ours notarized, but I think you need witnesses. In Colorado, we do not need witnesses, so just check on that. You need witnesses on deed in Florida also. Increasing interest have no negative impact. Doesn't matter at all. Unless your lease is tied to the payments, but you get to negotiate what makes sense to you. And you can negotiate a step rate lease that you pay a certain amount for some period of time and that steps up to a different amount. All of those things are possible. You can have all the benefits that the owners don't need. And that's really big deal. Sometimes an owner, for example, cash flow may be absolutely imperative because they have a big negative cash flow, but there's lots of equity in the property. Well, if that's the case, and you don't have a tremendous need for the cash flow, you're doing okay. You might lease it for ownership in the property for so an option on 50% of the upswing or some figure, and not take anything for you give them 100% of whatever you sublease it for. My son-in-law's first lease that he did, which I thought was a big mistake at the time, he leased, I think it was a fourplex, for some friends of his that he knew that were missionaries that really had a problem and really had a cash flow problem. And he paid them 99% of the rents that he took in. And my initial thought on that was, no good deed goes unpunished. It's going to come back to haunt him. But he was right and I was wrong. Now, why was he right? These people sang his praises everywhere. They built his business up overnight. And they had tremendous credibility and they helped, bring him a lot of business. So there are so many different ways to look at this and so many different benefits. Just don't overlook the various benefits that are available on the property. Big ticket expenses don't have to be a problem. Again, think about when you started out in this business and you buy a house, all of a sudden your furnace goes out, or your air conditioning, or you need a new roof. Think of all those things. What a Excedrin headache. You know, your cash flow is limited. It's a problem. Whereas you're just a tenant, call the owner. If your lease, if you pay for any expenses, you're going to have a stop loss. So you're not going to have to pay that much. So again, major benefit. The owner can have to do the painting. They can do any of those things that you want them to pay for. Just make sure you write it down, put it in the darn lease. You can also maintain your day job. You know, every once in a while I hear of someone that wants to get in the real estate business, and they say, I see you, Bruce, one sec. And they say, I got to quit my day job to get in the business because I don't have time to do this business. I actually met a guy dorming with Bill Cook a couple of years ago, and here was this young police officer in his early 20s, and he cranked up his credit cards to the tune of $100,000, taking all these courses on real estate, and he hadn't bought a single thing. Don't do that stuff. Don't do that stuff. With a master lease, you can just put your toe in the water one time. Try it once. See how bad it hurts. Keep your day job. You know, if you like it, try it again. It's not like you got to quit everything. It's not like you got to take on a whole bunch of overhead, like you got to maintain office space. You don't need any of that stuff. You can meet people at a coffee shop through a lease. It really is great. Now, Bruce, you had your hand up, so go ahead. What's the question?
Yes, and thank you. So you've negotiated a good lease on a good property. You want to keep long-term. It's all the things are right. And now you're having trouble with the owner on these big ticket items. What have you done in the past or is in your lease to, I guess, force them into getting that new roof or fixing the big ticket items?
Yeah, well, my lease will say several things. It would say that I have the right, but not the obligation, to advance funds for the part of the owners to solve problems. And then it said two other things, that if I do advance funds, then I can immediately pay myself back from the next rents that come in from tenants. And I gave myself the right to pay myself, plus in my case, I had 18% interest. So I could do that, but I also put that for every $100 that I expended, I could extend my lease. I can't remember if it was a month more or so much longer. So on a lease that I had tremendous cash flow that I didn't want to have go away, that wasn't all bad. So there was it worked out just fine. Now I got to notice that my internet connection right now is unstable, or someone's is. So if you don't hear me, someone let me know. Okay, so
just
maintaining your day job.
On that briefly, David.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So you've advanced funds, and so during the initial negotiation, what kind of things have you said to, let's say, allay the owner's fears about that particular clause? Because it does give you a fair amount of control.
Well, initially when I'm negotiating with them, we don't have any written contracts. We're just talking. So when they come to see me, I want to tell them how great our systems are, how everything works. And I really kind of have to bite my tongue. And I really try hard to spend 45 minutes to an hour just developing their situation. What are their needs? Dad got transferred to Cincinnati, Ohio. Wife's back in Colorado Springs with 3 teenage boys. If she doesn't get the boys back with the dad, they're going to lose the family. Whatever it is, I want to bring all that out. You've got the situation, they want you to lease their house, but you've got to know what the problem is. And then I'll talk about, our track record. And our track record's been good because we've been small. We haven't had 600 houses. I've had one eviction in my career. It was back in '81. We got all our rent before the first of the month every month. We tend to go from a tenant to a tenant with 0 downtime. over 90% of the time, we do that. So, it sounds good to them. And then I'll say, but you can't hire me. We may be able to do business. And then I'll ask them, do you want to take the risk and you get the reward? Or do you want me to take the risk and I'll get the reward? Well, what am I saying? If they take the risk and they get the reward, that's a performance lease. And on a performance lease, I pay them a percentage of what I get if and when I get it, and they pay all expenses a la carte. On a fixed lease, then I would guarantee the rent every month, whether it's vacant or full, and I take care of all the expenses up to some kind of a stop loss. And maybe it's a monthly stop loss and also an annual stop loss. So maybe I might agree to pay up to $50 or $75 a month, up to $400 a year. So I have that limitation, but we haven't even done the paperwork until we kind of have an agreement. And once we have that initial meeting, the very first thing I'll tell them is, what we offer is very uniquely different. And it either works for you or doesn't work for you. But you need to go talk to some other folks and talk to some traditional managers. And I've actually been doing this for 40 years. And so I know most of the guys in my town. And I'll say, let me give you some names. Go talk to these folks. These folks are honest, to the best of my knowledge. But I think you'll get traditional results, which kind of implies that it's not very good. And what you really find is, what I find is that when I don't seem too hungry that I need to go wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, sign here, press hard, last copy is yours, this is it. I find they want to do business with me more than if I tried to close them at that particular time. And in fact, I can honestly tell you that when we've signed contracts, some people have never even asked me what percentage of the rent I'm sending to them. They've decided they want to do business with me at all costs. And I'll give you an example of, I rented to a tenant one time, and he rented from me for a number of years, and then he moved out and bought a house. And he lived in the house for, let's say, 10 years, and then he moved to Cape Cod. He was a retired pastor, actually. And he called me up and he said, I want you to manage my house. And I said, I'm terribly sorry, but we're not taking on any properties anymore. And he said, you don't understand. I want you to manage our house. And I said, well, I'm sorry. I said, I live in Florida now, and the house is in Colorado Springs. He said, I don't care. He said, I saw how you screened us when we moved in, and I want you to manage the house. So we did. We leased the house from him. And he didn't care about the fee. It was, he knew that I'd find someone who would do what they said they would do, and they'd take care of the house. So I ran the house under a master lease for a number of years, performance lease. And then he came to me and said, it's time to sell the house. It's time for you to buy it. And so I did. And I bought it that had his name on it. So I had him deed it to a trust with his family's name on it. Well, I've had it now for a long time, but 10 years into ownership, the neighbor next door finally came to me and said, when are these guys going to come back? Well, they hadn't owned the house for 10 years, but it's just kind of a funny story. But if you are good at management, the fact that, if someone brought that objection up and said, well, why are we going to pay that big expense if we deal with this? I'd say, well, it's not my house. I mean, if you give me ownership in it, sure, I'll pay it up to, I'll put it on a roof for you right now for 50% ownership of the upside. I'll do that. I mean, so I have an option on it with a lease. All of those things are possible. What are their needs? There was a time in Colorado Springs when we're the hail capital of the world, and we all had to put on new roofs, and we were no longer allowed to use shake shingle roofs. And some of the subdivisions where you use something that looked like shake shingles, that was a very expensive roof. You had to use a metal roof or some sort that looked like a shake shingle. And my approach was to go around to find owners that really had a financial hardship to change that roof at that point and say, listen, let me put the roof on the house and just let me have an option to buy it when your kids are out of school and some point in time down the road. Those are all things that you can do, but again, it's looking at the owner's needs, not my needs. You gotta be willing to meet their needs first before you look at what you're going to do. Once you do that, I've never had a problem having to sign the contract. It's never been an issue at all. Let's see. You earn owners trust master leasing their property and they'll send you referrals. Question? Was there another question? I thought I heard someone. Okay.
I do have a question.
They'll send you referrals. Okay.
Okay, David, I'm sorry. Mine evidently has a little bit of a delay. This is Liz, and I got a couple of questions here that might fit from other folks in the group that have sent me. This one is saying that if they are already a licensed manager, can they still do a master leasing as a principal?
Great question. Great question. As a licensed real estate broker or agent or affiliate broker, are you allowed to buy real estate? Of course you are. As a licensed real estate agent, are you allowed to lease property that you own? Of course you are. Are you allowed to master lease properties? That's what my son-in-law does. And what I did, I became licensed January 7th of 1981. And from 81 until October 1st of 96, I managed properties for people and I acted as a buyer's agent to acquire properties for people. October 1st of 96, I canceled every agency relationship I had and I turned around and leased the properties I used to manage and did not lose one account. So yes, you clearly can. But what do you have to do? You have to disclose. And I have a full one-page disclosure that I use that says, Tilney is buying this for his account. He's buying it to make a profit for him, for his kids, for his wife, for his trust. He didn't give you any ideas to value. He didn't hold himself out as legal or tax consultant. All he did was tell you what he was willing to pay. And what you really find by doing that, I have a whole page, really an 8.5 by 11 page of disclosure on that order. And what you really find is people read that and they say, this is the most honest guy I ever saw. Everyone else who comes in here says, I'm here to help you. They're not here to help you. They're here to make a buck. Whereas I come in and say, I'm here to make a buck. But if me making a buck helps you, we'll do business. If it doesn't help you, we won't do business. And so it really works out very well. Over disclose. The biggest problem you have as a real estate professional is that if it looks like you did too well in a transaction, that some bureaucrat down the road may try and set it aside and end the transaction or against you. So be careful and just over disclose. It won't come back to bite you at all. Was there another question or should I keep going? Let's see the chat. I'm going to keep.
You could just keep going, but I'll have some at the end.
Okay, sure. That's fine. That's great. Let's see. Earned trust equates to big negotiating advantage if and when they want to sell. The simplest negotiation I found when they were selling in many cases, I'll just give you an example. Let's say the house is, give or take $100,000 house. And nowadays that would be a $300,000 house in my town, but let's say it's 100. I would send comps to the owner when they said they wanted to sell from, let's say, 50,000 to 500,000. I'd give them the whole thing. And then I'd talk to them and I'd say, I'm not going to set the price. The only thing I'm going to do is say yes or no. But just remember, if you do business with me and sell it to me, there's no downtime. You go from a lease to a sale. There's no negotiation. There's no points. There's no things you got to fix up. And I found that negotiation and people liked me because I had done at least what I told them I'd do. And they would carry the financing for me long-term in many cases. So I found negotiation once the problem is people want to go in and buy a house and they don't know you. They don't know anything about you. And you're asking for them to discount their property dramatically and take it. They perceive that you're trying to take advantage of them. Whereas if you create a rapport with people and you you like these people and you talk to them and you tell them, I'm in it to make a profit. It really worked out very, very well for me. Okay, the next section then says, is there any downside to master leasing? The bottom line is none if you know how to manage. If you don't know how to manage, you will hurt yourself and you will hurt other people. And so it's really, really important that you learn how to manage. You got to know and comply with your applicable laws. That means federal, state, and local. And also real estate licensing laws. You got to know all that stuff. And it's easy enough to learn that stuff. You know, in Florida, you've got Harry Heist at evict.com that's got a whole bunch of free videos that show you stuff there. You ought to look at that since you're in Florida. There's a bunch of other folks here too. You can find the whole Florida landlord-tenant law just by typing in Florida landlord-tenant law in Chrome, and the whole thing will come up. You can discover this stuff very, very quickly, but you got to know it, and otherwise you're playing with fire. You got to know how to screen for the best tenants, and the problem with that is it's kind of like looking for a needle in the haystack. And you may need to go through 50 before you find the right one. And so how can you afford the time to be able to do that? You got to have systems to do that. And bottom line is our tenants show our properties while they're still occupied, and they find us the next tenant, and they sell the tenants as to why they want to do business with us. And it works great. And we give out very difficult applications. Our applications are probably 7 or 8 pages long. It asks some unusual things like skills, plumbing, roofing, appliance repair, other tools owned. I mean, we think we're hiring someone to do a job. And the job description from our standpoint, number one, is maintain and improve the house and grounds. And we share the job description. Number two, it's pay the rent on time. If you don't want to do that, don't rent from us. We're too tough. Number three, it's get along with the neighbors. Number four, and I always have fun with this one. I look them in the eye and I say, I want you to stay at least until you die, and hopefully until your kids die. And then we kind of chuckle about that. And you know, I say, you may not want to stay quite that long. And then lastly, we want you to be able to use us as a reference when you need us. But other than that, we're going to leave you alone. We're going to treat you with respect. We know it took you a lot to get where you are in this world. And we're not the kind of folks that are going to hand you a contract and say, sign here, press hard, last copy's yours, move into the house, sit in a chair, face a wall, and don't touch anything. And if you do something wrong, here's how we're going to beat you up. Our approach is, first of all, the one thing we will do is go through the rental contract with you. It's the final sieve in our screening process. If you got through everything else and you look right, smelled right, and tasted right, but you're not right, it should come out then. And before you sign a lease, you should be able to stand up, look them in the eye, and say, hey, let's shake hands. Let's be friends. What you're trying to accomplish and we're trying to accomplish is two different things. It's not going to work. And so you avoid you avoid being hit with a target with a problem. So it's very important, I think, to have that opportunity to share expectations before folks move in. But you've got to have a way to screen for the best of the best. You've got to draft safe documents. You've got to have consistent policies and procedures in order to deal with fair housing. Boy, you got to treat everyone the same. You really do. Now, that doesn't mean that once they're in there, you can't find everyone has a different button that reacts for them. When I talk about my tenants hiring them, well, as you would hire an employee, think of employees. Employees have different needs. Some employees want the employee parking spot of the month. You know, they want, another one wants a gold star on something. Another one wants more pay. Another one wants flexible work hours. Your tenants are the same thing. They have different needs. So once they're in your properties, if you can find out their needs and you think of the story I told you of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, just remember that. But that doesn't mean that if a problem comes up on your house that you treat people differently. Jump on problems, solve them quick, deal with them right away. Don't pass go. Very, very important. Deal with problems immediately. Well, I just covered it. So that's really important. Bruce, again.
Okay, yeah. So I just did that where the tenant shows the property. And it worked out well. They found two very good candidates. And I made an error in the fact that I didn't tell the current tenant, don't, like, what you're paying is not what they're going to be paying. And so, I ended up not renting to the other one of those two people. But obviously, at some point, they're going to talk about the rent. But how do you handle that transition in the rent? And I was going to raise the rent $150 a month. This is a house that rented for $1,050, and I was looking for 12. I was really looking for 13, but I would have taken 12. Please.
Yeah, all I can tell you is that doesn't happen to me. What we tell our tenants is they can answer any question they want. They can tell them about the utilities. They can tell them what they think about us. They can tell them anything they want to about the house. And theoretically, our tenants know a lot more about the house than we do. The one thing we don't want them to do is walk them through our rental contract, because our rental contract is weird. And you know it's weird because you've been to my seminar. And so we tell them not to cover that aspect. And they don't do that anyway. So it really hasn't been a problem. I don't think I've ever told them not to tell them what you're paying in rent currently. I don't think that's something that's come up for me. I'm not sure. I don't think I've ever heard that. But what I would say is you just took a seminar. So learn from the seminar.
I did.
Tell your tenants not to tell them what you're paying. And anytime it costs you time or money, you took a seminar. And anytime you hire a tenant that's less than the perfect tenant, make sure that you do an autopsy and you figure out what the heck you did wrong so you won't do it again, and get better at the craft over time. Okay?
And David, that seminar was more expensive than your seminar. I do want to add this, though. Basically, what I came through in my mind was just say, listen, I'm paying $1,050, but Bruce already told me it looks like he's going to have to raise the rent. So to leave that open, like that was.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things landlords do wrong, I think, is they don't share expectations with tenants on day one that rents will go up regularly. So here you got this yearling tenant, the first year they're in there, and they haven't accumulated enough stuff to kind of trap themselves in the house. And my visual image of how you get them to attract stuff, there's just an image, is you got a house with a 2-car garage and a garage door opener, and the first thing you want to do is hang a sign on the garage door opener saying danger, high voltage, do not use. Why? Because you don't want them to put their cars in there. You want them to accumulate stuff. The more stuff they have, the tougher it is for them to move. But anyway, and they get to know the neighbors and the neighborhood, and they stay for a while if you get them into the second year. But the first year, they haven't been there long enough to be cemented to the property. And so right on day one, when they're signing a lease, we tell them rents have to go up every year. If they don't go up every year, then we either have to sell the property or it's going to be foreclosed, because property taxes go up, insurance costs go up, our cost to maintain the house go up, everything goes up. Hopefully your income goes up. And so you share those expectations, and we even go further than that. We sell them a limitation on how much they can go up, and then we make them pleased when we raise it less than that at the end of the year. So, sharing expectations is a big part of doing business. You don't want to spring something on a tenant, a month before his lease is over that his rent's going up $250 for a month. You want them to know up front. You want them to that's just really important. That's bottom line. That's all I can tell you.
And David, I want to just ask a similar question. So, okay, that I have student rentals, and this particular house is not a student rental. So, here's my predicament. I mean, in some way, I have to have two different kinds of leases. And so, would you deem that I am now treating people differently, or not all the same? That I have, these houses with this kind of, I'm 20 years old and I'm not a mature person yet. versus I'm a mature person lease. Do you see any fair housing problem with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think so. I think you set up policy and procedure manual that covers that you handle student rentals one way and single family houses a different way. And I think that's reasonable. I mean, student housing, you're getting above market rent on student housing because you're throwing a whole bunch of kids in a multi-bedroom house. And you know that when they move out, you have a balloon note that comes due and you got to go through the house and square it away. Whereas if you're renting a house long-term for 25 years to one family, theoretically, you don't have to do anything until they move out, and then you got to rehab the house. So, but I mean, create a policy procedure manual. You're going to treat all students in your student housing business the same. You're going to treat all people in your single-family house units the same. But they are different businesses. They're very different businesses. I don't know anything about the student housing business. And at my age, I don't want to learn. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so change your management paradigm to maximize your real estate results. Tenants are your assets, not the real estate. The more I can get that through your head, I mean, that is so true for me. If I thought my tenants were, tenants in toilets, tenants are liars, that they never look better than the day they move in, that it goes downhill from them, that they just destroy my properties, I wouldn't have been able to be in this business 40 years. It would have driven me out. And most folks don't stay in it 40 years. 20 to 25 years in, they burn out, which means that's a whole group of people that you should be able to pick up their properties because they are burned out old landlords. And there's a whole bunch of folks my age that are landlords in your area. I know a bunch of them that would love to have some young, high energy people involved with their properties probably. But, the tenants are the solution to meeting your goals, not the problem. They are the on-site resident managers. If you'll give your tenants the control needed to do their job you've hired them to do, understand that it's your fault if they fail and do autopsies on your failures to improve your systems and procedures. I'm a control freak, as I think most landlords are. But I really need to let you know that I find the more control I give up to my tenants, the more control I really have. I can live wherever I want. Kind of a strange year to tell you this, but for the month of February, we were in Southeast Asia just before COVID-19. Actually, it was over there, as a matter of fact. But I have no employees back here, and my February rents. I left before the last day in January, and we collect all the rents by ACH. We take it out of the tenant's bank account once a month, and I'd set it all up so all the rents came in. No one was late. Everything was fine. I came back and reconciled the books and got squared away, and then the March rents came in right away. So it's not a hard business. I really don't think. As I say, landlording will become your lazy way of playing at real estate, and it will provide inflation hedged income for your retirement. Good management is the key to master leasing, as it also is to long-term ownership. I already told you before that I think that if you don't know how to manage, you're really just inventorying property for those of us who do. Management's always a key. But the problem is people don't really want to learn management. They either think they know it or they want to hire the nice man and not learn it. But I think, and people who are managing their properties, the real problem there is you're so busy working in your business that you don't have the time to work on your business. And to be a good manager, you need to have time to work on your business. You need to develop systems and procedures. If you're going to buy your very first rental house, I'm here to tell you, you need to prepare a policy and procedure manual right up front. Why? Because if nothing else, it protects you from a fair housing complaint. Very, very important to show that you consistently treat everyone the same. Your income is not based on the time you spend managing. Income is not based upon your ability or willingness to work. I don't do a heck of a lot of anything. I do work on my business. We've just been working on getting all our new contracts ready to send out the last couple of days. And, we changed them a lot last year because, quite honestly, we saw more changes in the Landlord Tenant Act in Colorado in 2019 than I'd seen from 78 until 2019. Absolutely amazing. All this stuff seems to be coming from the West Coast across to the East. And so be aware, make sure you're up to date on your laws and you know what's going on. It's very important. So I create the original contracts, then my wife goes through and proofreads them, and then we get them set, and then we create a letter and send them out, and they'll go out in the next week, I suspect. But working on your business, I think, is very, very important. Management proficiency allows you to acquire burned out landlords' properties, and there's a lot of burned out managers or landlords. As I said, 20 to 25 years, and people say, I never want to see another tenant again. I want to sell off everything, buy government bonds, clip coupons, and I'm out. The problem is government bonds aren't paying much these days, and your rentals will pay a heck of a lot more if you learn how to run them right. Management skill set provides you an asset you can use to negotiate equity positions with financial investors. You know, I got involved with 3 houses outside of Atlanta. I'm the money guy on those deals. Someone else is the finder, fixer, and operator. And there's a guy I've known for 30 some years. I know his moral code. He's absolutely honest. And we set it up that he owns the properties. Why? Because I don't know the laws in Georgia. And I don't want the potential liability of having properties there when I don't know what all the laws are. So an entity that I own has loaned the money to acquire the properties. And, you know, just to give you some numbers, I think we acquired 3 decent houses, turnkey, ready to go, for a total of $114,000 for all 3. One's a 432, one's a 321, and one's a 2 carport, something like that. Or was. One of them burned, and that was the best return we had. But anyway, so an entity I have has a note on them where half the net income is deemed interest to me. It's a performance note. And then Tilney has an option on half the upside, so that the upside is all long-term capital gain to me. But I control when I sell my note. I control if I sell my option. The other guy controls when he sells the property. I have no control of that. He owns it. And I really don't care. But we each control 100% of what we've got. We're not partners on any specific part of the deal. But, you know, the other individual, he didn't put any money in. He used his time and his management expertise to get half the income and half the upswing. And you think about that, if the properties are free and clear, that's not bad. If he's willing to work hard, he'll do very well for half the income and half the upswing. And you can do that if you have the management skills. Your skill set can help unintentional landlords solve problems. Who's an unintentional landlord? Well, it's someone who's been forced to leave town because of employment. It's someone who maybe inherited a property from someone who died and can't sell the property. It's someone who has too much debt on the property and is going down, and you may be able to figure out how to help them. They're not people who chose to get into this business. And most of the people I dealt with in building my portfolio initially were unintentional landlords. Good management does not mean traditional management. You cannot, nor would you want to manage for others unless you're a licensed real estate broker. As a master tenant, you're only managing for yourself. You're a professional landlord who rents properties under some terms and conditions and releases them subject to the terms of your lease with the owner. I mean, that's basic, but it's very important. Good management skills come from working on your business, not just in your business. Always ask yourself why you do things certain ways. Be willing to open to change, continue to experiment and improve your systems and procedures. You know, if you haven't heard this name, write it down. Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. Simon Sinek, he did a bunch of TED Talks, and you can go to YouTube and pull up Simon Sinek, and I recommend you do that, and you'll see some of his talks. They're short. They're well worth hearing. He's also written 3 books. I've read all of them. But he wrote a book. The primary word in the title is why. But his approach is so great. Andrea Smoot has something from him right there if you look. But he says, you know, pretty much everyone can tell you what they do. Some people can tell you how they do what they do. Very, very few people can tell you why they do what they do. It's the why that's important. Why do you want to own real estate? It's the benefits you're looking for. And so always ask yourself the why. It's the most important question all the way along, I think. And Simon Sinek really will, you'll enjoy. I would say listen to him and maybe continue and buy his books. He also has a book on leadership, and I'm always looking at leadership books. He has one that says, I think, Leaders Eat Last. And I think it's a good book. And when you're dealing with your tenants, don't ask your tenants to do something you wouldn't do. Our whole deal with tenants is you want to inspire them and you want to influence them. You can't cajole them. You can't force anyone to do what you want them to do. And that's what too many landlords do. They use the stick of the security deposit as a way to get compliance. And that doesn't work. It's really some of these leadership roles that will really help you with that. Real estate is a people business. Don't automate to the point that you lose contact with your tenants. Tenants need to know you care about them and their needs. I'm a member of the National Association of Residential Property Managers. I hang out with a number of property managers. And more I see more automation in this business all the way around. And I automate a lot. I mean, we don't show properties, we don't inspect properties. And rent collection, I collect all my rents in 5 minutes a month. We do a lot of things that are pretty automated. But I do have the people touch. I do deal with my tenants. And I find now that people are not only doing self-showings to tenants, but applications online from tenants, signing leases online with tenants. And if managers can figure out how, they'll have the tenants pick up the keys so they never have to see them the entire time they do business with them. I don't think that works because it is a people business. You need to share expectations. You need to verify that what you're offering is what the tenant wants, and what the tenant wants is what you're offering. You don't have that opportunity to do that unless you meet eyeball to eyeball, belly to belly. Or can you do it through the phone? Yes. Have I done that? Yes. It's not as good as eyeball to eyeball. Will I consider using Zoom in the future? Yes. I mean, there are some great things that have come out of this COVID-19. Things like Zoom. There are other ways we can do business down the road. But you need that ability to have that personal relationship. When the COVID-19 thing really came about, we thought it was really important. Well over a month ago, we called up all our tenants individually, and we just let them know we care. And we said, if you have a problem, we have a problem. And so if something goes wrong, by all means, let us know. And, we believe in the power of prayer. If someone gets sick, we'd really like to hear about it. And then we also told them that I made a decision. I really think that I think there's two phases to COVID-19. One is the medical situation. People are going to get sick, people are going to die. But I think the bigger thing is the economic. And I think economic's going to be with us a long time. So I made the decision, right or wrong, and time will prove me out, that we said we're in Colorado Springs, we're not going to raise any of our rents this year. And we're just happy to have good folks in our houses going another year. We said they will have to go up next year, but we think that given our marketplace, knowing that my rents are top market anyway, because I have good houses and I keep them at top market, we thought it was the right thing to do. And that brought us so much goodwill, just that conversation, that people would open up and talk to us about their finances and tell us their situation. And I would say that's really important. And I was given credit for the ELF formula, and I did not create that formula. And someone on this call will know, I do know exactly who it was. Remembering his name is another issue. It was the guy who did the 1031, always wore the 1031 button. But it was not, it was one of the guys that was one of the mentors to Jack Miller. And he actually went down in a boat in Pearl Harbor, and after multiple hours of thinking they drowned, they went up and lifted up the hatch and found they were up of the water. But I can't think of his name right now. And anyway, he came up with the ELF formula, meaning easy, lucrative, and fun. And I think managing properties is easy, lucrative, and fun. I think it's a great way to make a living, and it really is fun. The last page on this talk, I've gotten my thoughts as to how tenants want exactly what you want with very few exceptions. Tenants want to live in a safe environment. My gosh, I want a safe environment too. I don't want to be in a war zone. I don't want my wife to have to go to a property at some strange hour and have a potential problem. There's no conflict there. It's much easier to manage and maintain a property that's not a war zone property. They want well-maintained property. Well, I do too. I find if you run property into the ground and have to resurrect them, it's much, much more expensive than taking care of them from day one. That doesn't mean I want castles. We had a lot of 800 square foot houses that worked great, but everything in them functioned right. They all worked and they were neat and clean, but they generate more rent, they appeal to a better applicant, and they're cheaper to maintain. Let's see, tenants want understanding and agreement regarding the rights and obligations of both parties. I want the same thing. There's no conflict there. Tenants want control of occupancy. They want to be able to leave when they want to leave, but they want to be able to stay long term. Not have the property sold or foreclosed out from underneath them. Well, I want those rights. So that is a potential conflict. And so you have to cooperate to mitigate the costs and damages to each party and work together on that. But I'm not going to give up those rights. I want that control. However, I'll look anyone I do business with in the eye and say, I want you to stay here at least until you die and hopefully until your kids die. So they do know, and we do advertise our property as being long-term rentals. We're definitely in the long-term business. They don't want to pay late fees. Well, I don't want to collect late fees. I think it's a pain in the neck to have to run all over to hound people for that. Now, John McVeigh is a good friend of mine in Fort Myers, and he may be on this. I gave a talk like this not long ago, and he called me up right after it and said, you know, I still like my late fees. He told me when he went to a class I did that he generates over $45,000 of late fees a year. Well, if that's the case and you like that, fine. You're like the credit card company. By a certain date, this is your payment. If you pay after that date, you pay that much more. Pay me now or pay me later. Either way, that works. I just find if I can efficiently use my time and collect all my rents in 5 minutes a month, it gives me a lot more time. You know, I get my rents on the last business day of the month. Think this through for a second. The next morning, I go online, get my bank statements. I reconcile my bank statements. I'm done for the month. I'm done, with the exception of special things that I'm doing, capital improvements. We just poured a new concrete driveway today in Colorado Springs. I'm doing a rehab there right now. But I'm done with the basics because the rents are in and my books are reconciled and the month is closed by the first of the month. They don't want rent increases. You need periodic rent increases. So that means you got to share those expectations on day one. And too often landlords don't do that. And so a good tenant at the end of the year says, who do you think you are raising the rent? I'm not going to put up with this. And he moves, and he doesn't realize he moves out of your property into another property that the owner had just raised the rent before he moved in. He doesn't see that. So make sure you share those expectations up front. Your tenants want to make your house their home. Well, I want that to happen too. You don't want people, quote unquote, camping out in your houses. You want them to take your house and make it their home. It's so important. You want them to internalize. You want them to take pride in it. It makes a big difference. They want more discretion to make decisions about maintaining the house and grounds. This is the one place where I really disagreed with Jack Miller, who was my main mentor. He wanted soldiers who would take orders. I want self-directed on-site resident managers who will minimize my operating costs. You know, there's only two ways to increase your bottom line, either increase your income or decrease your expenses. I found in my career that it's so much easier to decrease my expenses than it is to increase my income. And my tenants are one of the best ways I can decrease my expenses because they do a super job. So I do give them more discretion to make decisions. Now, they have very strong parameters. You know, I tell them that don't do something without clearing it up with us up front in advance so it doesn't come back to haunt us or haunt you, but we're on the same team, we're looking at the same thing, and if they've got a great idea, and they've got a great skill set, then clearly we would let them do some things. And in fact, we'll give them examples of things that people have done to kind of plant the seed in their mind that this is what these folks have done. What's your ideas to improve the place? And we really have done a lot of that over the years. They want an honest landlord. Well, I want honest tenants. The problem is that, most tenants have had a bad experience with the landlord, myself included. And so tenants are untrusting initially. So how are you going to gain that trust? It is going to take time. You really have to work on breaking down that barrier. And really, if you want them to trust you, you have to first trust them, I've found. You can't expect them to trust you if you don't trust them. And you almost have to show your juggler a little bit and take that risk. But it's well worth it if you can accomplish that task. They want respect from the landlord, the neighbors, and the bureaucrats. I want the same thing from the tenants. They want to be appreciated for the business and stewardship of the property. I want appreciation for providing good housing. We think we provide good housing for long-term occupancy. And they want a good move-out experience. Well, I do too. They save me thousands of dollars. Think about this for a second. When do most tenants move out of a property? I'll just tell you, since it's too hard to do two-way. Most people move out on the last day of the month. Well, when do most people move into a property? They move in on the first day of the month. So let's say you're a crackerjack landlord and you can make your property ready, meaning spiff and shine it and make it right, in 2 days. How much rent have you lost? If you're not careful, you've lost a month's rent. Why? Because the person who needed to move in on the first found another place that was available on the first. You can't afford to lose a month's rent for several reasons. First of all, you'll never make up that lost income. You'll never make it up again. But the other thing is, houses were made to have people live in them. You need good stewards there, if nothing else, to protect them, taking care of the yard and whatever. I was visiting Walter Wofford once in Jackson, Mississippi, and he took me by a house he closed on the previous day, only to discover that his air conditioner was no longer present. Funny things happen, on houses that aren't occupied. You need people in them. Those are all my notes. I'm open to any questions, comments, or further discussion. That's it. But I
Yes,
appreciate
David.
your attention. How can I help?
David, I have several questions that came up over time, and if you're ready, I'll start asking you those.
Of course.
Okay. So the first one I have on here is that the person is apologizing because they say they don't understand how to approach an owner about master leasing. Please share how you start the conversation with an owner about doing a master lease, and what are the top 3 benefits that you give him or her so that they really will hear you.
Okay. Let me give you examples of things that people have done, because I did make it too light. I said anything that a property management company does, you can do too. David Pond, I thought was one of the most creative guys I saw. He's in Fort Collins, Colorado. He had a title company give him a list of property owners in a farming area that he liked the houses, that got their property tax notices mailed to a different location. And he went around and took a picture of every one of those properties, turned it into a postcard, sent it to the owners with something written on it that said something like, I guess you didn't know what was happening. If I can help, let me know, and a phone number. Well, you think about that, a postcard lands in a mailbox, and either you see a picture of your own house or you see the message on the back. He got a lot of action. He built up a management, a big book of business very, very quickly. He built it up so fast that he got bored after a while and he sold that business off. What are some of the other things you can do? My son-in-law joined one of these networking groups. I can't think of the name of it, but you pay something to join it. And I thought he, again, made a big mistake because he paid for 3 years up front in advance. And they have one of each kind of professional in the group. What was it?
BNI.
Someone said something. What was the group? Yeah, that's it. Yeah, BNI. And so he got known as the manager type. And he was a licensed real estate broker, but he only master leases. But so he got a lot of referrals from that, and that worked for him. He also went to a bunch of insurance agents, and insurance agents or insurance policies, if you're familiar with them, if an owner moves out of the house and has a vacant house for 30 or 60 days, whatever it is, the insurance policy won't cover vandalism or a number of other problems. And so he went to the insurance agent and said, I know you can't give me a list of all your customers where this has happened, but you can give my name and number out because I can help solve their problem. I can lease their house from them. They can change from an owner-occupied dwelling to a rental property, and the insurance will be enforced and they'll be safer. Okay. So he picked up properties that way. Now, how did I pick up mine? I started slowly, and I started as an agent, holding myself out as a property manager. I never really wanted to be a manager. What happened was we were buying properties. I tested 3 different property managers with our stuff, and they all fell flat on their face. None of them had the attention to detail and follow through that was required. And I was really acting as a buyer's agent in acquisition of buying things for people. But since I was forced into managing our stuff, I figured I might as well take on some other management to help pay my overhead. And so little by little, I picked it up. And my initial approach was, bring me your problems. It was kind of like the Kmart blue light special. Give me the biggest problems you got. Just dump them on me because I like it. So I built up enough income, and then I immediately got rid of the chaff, threw away the bad properties, and replaced them with better properties. And so then I got known as in my community that I knew how to manage. And so really I was very lazy. I did very little marketing. It all kind of came to me over time. People would tell people and they liked the experience of doing business with me. And so that's how my business developed. How many properties did we run? Not that many. We had a little over 100. I don't know the exact number, but it worked well. Now, what were the benefits that the owner get? Well, they didn't have to deal with tenants and toilets. And most owners are scared to death of dealing with tenants and toilets. That's why they hire management companies. And I had so many things I could offer that was different. If they dealt with me, they dealt with me personally. They had my cell phone. The buck stopped here. They didn't call a company and get a different person every time they called that didn't know them, didn't know the situation, and employees would come and go. It was me. They didn't have vicarious liability for my acts. I could protect them from that. If the bottom line number was identical, and I'll give you the example of how it could be identical, just for the sake of the math so you can see it. If I managed their property and charged them a 10% management fee versus I master leased their property, agreeing to pay them 90% of whatever I collected if and when I collected it, their bottom line is going to be exactly the same, right? Well, the difference is, I think from a tax audit standpoint, it's better to show less income and less expenses than more income and more expenses. So by me paying them less and them not having a management fee come out as an expense, I think that looked better for them. But it also was better because they could show they were actively involved in managing the property because they did not hire a manager. They were doing business with me. They leased it to me, so they must have been managing it themselves. There are any number of benefits, but I think the big thing is it's not a one size fits all. It's not, what do you charge? 10%, 11%, 8%. And then even if you dealt with management companies, and there may be managers on the call, but it's not what you charge. There's also a whole bunch of other nickel and dime charges. And it's also how effective are you? How fast are you at doing evictions? Well, I've only done one. If someone says, oh, we're really good, we know how to do it. Well, you don't want someone who does evictions on a regular basis. I have a whole series of questions that I've got in the book as to what you want in your property manager. You want to know, do they own property themselves? If they don't own property themselves, they don't think like an owner. They don't know what you're looking for. I'm an investor. I own property. I'm a landlord, and so anything that a fee manager could offer an owner, I could offer them more, because I could tailor it to their needs. And there was just no question. How I got them in the door. You know, another thing that David Pond did that I thought was just brilliant. He's a very smart guy. He, years ago, he bought a 4-part color picture of a balloon festival from the picture is from sitting in this balloon, looking down through all these other balloons at the town of Fort Collins, Colorado. And he printed that on an 11 by 17 4-part brochure. And so the outside is just this big picture looking down on the town. So he looks like he's the biggest outfit in the whole town. And then you open up the brochure and there's all these gorgeous houses that he managed. And then he had some script somewhere in it and he sent it to out of town owners. And he obviously looked like the biggest guy in town. And so he picked up a lot of business. Now, the funny thing he told me one day, well, and he's not in this business anymore, and he's a good friend, so I don't think he'd mind me saying this. He had an owner call him up one day and say, well, how come you got a picture of my house in your brochure? And he'd gone around, he never said he managed these houses. He took pictures of very nice houses. And he said that in hindsight, he should have gone to another town to take the pictures. But, you know, you got to be creative. If you know how to buy houses cheap, you certainly ought to figure out how you can rent them from people. It's an easier process. There's a lot more people looking to buy them or to loan against them than there are people who are willing to take on that tenant responsibility. I don't know if I answered it. If you got more questions on it, go for it. But that's pretty much it.
Yes, that was great. Let's see. Here's another one. What does David mean when he said he secured it with a deeded trust?
Good. Now remind me, Florida is a deeded trust state, and it's not a mortgage state. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's deeded trust, aren't you? Mortgage? Is it mortgage? It's one or the other. Either way, whichever it is, use whatever is appropriate in your state. The deeded trust or mortgage is not the promise. It's the glue that glues the promise to the property. So you have a note that is your promise to pay when you borrow money to buy a property. And then that note is glued to the property with either a mortgage or a deeded trust. So I just glued the promises that the owner made in his lease with me to the property. So that if the owner went to sell the property, the title company would see that there was this deed of trust on it, which they assumed was a loan, and the property couldn't be sold without giving me a call and solving the problem. Now, some people record the lease, which you can do if you have a recordable format, and we did, meaning we had a legal description on it, and we had signatures were notarized. But we didn't. I like to stand, you know, white against a white wall, and I thought it looked better to just look like I was a lender than to show also I just didn't want my contracts all over the world. So I just use a standard Fannie Mae Freddie Mac deed of trust, and I put something in one of the blank paragraphs where you put a legal description or whatever that every word, every time in this document where the word note is used, it's hereby changed to the word lease. And that was it. And I recorded it and it was done.
Dave, what's
Very good.
Sorry.
I think Susan's trying to say something.
As far as,
Or
you know, when
someone
you have a mortgage, you know, you have, what numbers do you pull out of the lease to put on that mortgage?
That's a great question. You know, there's no requirement to put a number in it. And the first one I did not put a number in it, which is very confusing. And when I went to, I can't remember if it was recording it or releasing it. The bureaucrats couldn't understand the recording, what the situation was. Now, in Colorado, to record a deed of trust, it cost me $10 the first page and $5 thereafter. In Florida, you have the joy of paying doc stamps, which I wasn't aware of. And it just goes to show you the importance of knowing the different laws in different states. Because I put a deed of trust on a property that I bought here, and it cost me big expense to put on it because I put on $1 million debt to an entity that I controlled just as an insurance policy. And I had the joy of paying $5,000 to do that. But So you can use whatever number you want, but now I do have a clause in the lease that I tie a number to the glue that glues it with a mortgage or a deed of trust. And typically I'll just find some number that I like when I'm doing it in Colorado, since I don't pay doc fees. For me, for example, on one that the mortgage payment was, I think, $1,330 a month, and my payments were $995, and I subleased for $1,295 initially. I took $1,330 times 72, I think, because I rented it for or either 60 or 72 months. And that was the amount that I put in that paragraph in the lease, and I tied it to the same number in the mortgage or deed of trust. But there's no magic. Put any number you want. In Florida, I'd be inclined to put a smaller number because you got to pay a doc fee.
You never get any
Thank you.
pushback from any of the owners to sign that mortgage?
It's just a deal at the very end. Everything's done, and I said, now we need to go to your bank or something and get this notarized, the document, and I give them the other document, and they'll say, what's this all about? If they do ask, and I'll say, well, you're asking me to take on the responsibility of taking care of your house. I want to make sure that you don't go into foreclosure and I lose my interest. I've got this long-term lease, and I've got a lot of stake here. And so clearly I want to secure my lease with something. It's a valuable thing for me. And if you do go into foreclosure, I want to have an opportunity to have a position at that sale that I can protect, that someone has to come in below me. I've never had a problem with it. Never have. By then,
Okay.
I've got their trust, or we're not doing business in the first place.
Oh, excellent. Okay, now I have another question. Let's see, here it is. This person had no idea you could borrow against a master lease. Who might lend on something like this? Could you give an example of how much might be borrowed on it, and I guess how that deal or what it would look like?
Well, I'll tell you, if you brought me a 35-year lease well secured with a deed of trust at where I was making $300 or $400 a month, I'd loan you on it all day. I mean, commercially, it's done a lot. In single-family houses, have I ever seen it done? No, but I haven't asked. I have some economic friends that I think they'd be willing to loan it to me. Fine. You know, it doesn't work unless you ask. I told you that this is as big as your mind can perceive what you can do with master leasing. There was a while when I thought, you know, I'd take young dentists that came out of dental school that wanted to set up a practice, and I'd lease their practice to them, and I'd take a percentage of their income as a lease. So I'd essentially be leasing a license. I think you can lease all kinds of stuff, master lease stuff, and you know, can they borrow on it? I mean, clearly a land lease under a hotel is loaned against all the time. The hotel is just, how good is your lease? How long is it? How secure is it? What kind of potential for income is there? If it's good enough, I'll loan on it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Here's a question for you. What do you mean when you say portfolio income is the hardest to shelter?
Well, it just is from tax, you know, earned income. You have business expenses you can write off, Schedule C or whatever. Passive income, you can write off all your depreciation. That's rental income. Portfolio income is interest income, dividends, that kind of stuff. There's no write-off against any of that stuff. I think it's hard. From my standpoint, it's the hardest thing I know to shelter. I don't know how you do it. You can shelter $25,000 from your rental income losses against it, subject to the phase out, depending on your income level. It phases out from $100,000 to $150,000, unless you're, you know, spend so many hours and meet some other requirements. But it's just the fact that the portfolio income, there's nothing you can write off against it.
Okay, very good. And here's one that says, do you ever Okay, what if one of your renters is interested in a lease option? Do you ever lease option out any of your properties, or do you only do straight rents with everyone?
The answer to every real estate question I know is it depends. I master lease optioned a property from a young GI family that I knew years ago from our church. And this was when, most of you guys will have no idea, but there was a time when interest rate went to like 21.5% or some such thing. And this was when that was prime rate, and interest rates were very, very high. And they bought a house, and since they were in the military, they got a CHAFA VA loan, which is Colorado Housing Authority VA loan, and which gave them a special deal on the interest rate. They treated the military differently, but the loan said that it was due to be paid off if they ever failed to occupy it as their primary residence, and they were being transferred out of town. So I went to him and I said, okay, I'm going to set you up with the #1 sales guy I can find in the town, and I'll be the lease guy, and we'll see who can solve the problem first. And the first thing we did was we went to the Colorado Housing Authority and we said, do you want the house back or what? And they said, okay, you can lease it. So we tried to sell it and lease it. And of course I leased it first, and I leased optioned it. So I had the right to rent it and had the right to buy it at a certain price. And then I subleased, first right of refusal optioned it to our tenant. Now, what's the difference? My option was a right without an offsetting liability. I could definitely I could exercise my right. When I subleased it to my occupant tenant, I only gave them a first right of refusal option to buy it, assuming I could deliver title. Because although I had the right to get title to the property, there's no way I could guarantee the owner would physically give it to me unless I put a gun to their head. So you got to be pretty careful on a master lease situation that you don't promise something that you can't perform on. If I couldn't get title, then there would have been fraud involved that I sold something that I couldn't sell. So I gave them a limited right that said that as long as I can get title, then you can buy it from me at this price. And that worked out fine. Now on my own properties, the most efficient way to make my properties go away, if there's something I want to go away, is sell it to the tenant. And I clearly have done that when I want to exchange into a better property. I haven't done it in recent years because my properties that I have now pretty much, I want to pass down to the next generation. There's no reason why I want to get rid of them. They're all pretty good properties at this point. And so I generally do not lease option properties to tenants. I will sell to tenants, but not lease option. Why? Most times I find that when people are lease optioning to tenants, they collect maybe $5,000 as option consideration from the tenant up front and then lease it to them. Or else they may not charge as much option consideration, but they want to get higher rent. And they either want to do that to sell a property that's not saleable in the marketplace, or else to generate above normal rents or profits. And what starts out great usually ends badly. At some point in time, sometimes the landlords do it in a way that they don't want the tenants to be able to exercise the option. And so it's set up that they can't. And finally, the occupants realize that and they get steamed, and funny things happen to your house. And I don't want my tenants to get steamed and hurt my house. I want my tenants to live in my houses because they want to be there. And I just find for myself, it's a better way to do business. And I don't want my properties to go away either. I want to hold on to them forever now, the ones I've got now.
Right. That's what you taught me for sure. Okay. So let's see another question here. Okay. Here's a good one. Please explain, how did you set it up so that you can take rents out of your tenant's account, if I heard that correctly?
Oh, I use ACH, Automatic Clearinghouse. And there's a number of sources that will do that for you for a modest fee. But I think the best thing to do is deal with small local banks. If you can get privately owned banks, they all have the ability to do that. And if you want to find out banks that offer the service, I'd say go to your local apartment association and talk to the affiliate members. There'll be affiliate members that are vendors that sell services to the apartment association, and there'll be a banker there. And most of the apartments want to collect their rents using automatic clearinghouse. I do it straight through my bank, and it doesn't cost me a dime. And I can pull money from accounts or push money to accounts. If anyone gives me a routing number and an account number, then I can deal with that. Now, the bank has to trust you because there's a risk involved in that I could take a bunch of money out of someone's account, put it in my account, then, turn it into cash and go overseas. And obviously, I've stolen funds and I'm guilty as charged. And so banks have to know that you're going to be good for it and you're going to do what you say you're going to do and not abuse folks. The other thing you ought to realize is that the same as a credit card, that can be, the transaction can be canceled at some point down the road after it's in your account, meaning the funds can be pulled back out. And ACH can also, if the folks claim that it was that it was done without your permission or shouldn't have been done. Now, when my tenants sign an original contract with me, they sign a little form, much like you sign when you move into a hotel, that says you agree to pay all charges you incur when you're at the hotel. Mine, they give me their routing number and their account number, and they agree that I can ACH their account for all charges that they ever owe me. And I've never had anyone take back the ACH. I've never had a problem at all, and it works really, really well. And I can collect the rent from wherever I am in the world. It's great. It goes right in my bank. Don't have to put my shoes on. Very efficient. That was one of the things I really disliked about the note business. When I was running the note portfolio, the payments came in dribs and drabs. Whenever people, notes said they were due at different times, and many times they were due on the 1st and not late until the 15th. And I kept having to put my shoes on and go to the bank. It's a very inefficient way to run your business, I think, whereas the ACH works really, really well.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's see. Here's one that is asking, when you master lease, please talk about how you determine the length of time if the owner is willing to do it, like 10 or 35 years. I wasn't aware that we could set one up that long. Did I hear you say that there are tax benefits for making it longer?
Not really in my case. I mean, there could be. The IRS does say that you own the property if you have at least 30 years or longer. So you can do a 1031 tax defer exchange, clearly. But since I'm not paying anything, I don't have a basis in the lease every dime I'm paying out. It's not that I get to depreciate part of it. I do better than that. I don't offer them anything up front. But I don't set the length of term of the lease. The owner does. It's what are their needs? What do they need to have accomplished? And yes, I may not take it on, or I may steer them. If I've got a tenant that's upside down with a negative cash flow, I'll say, do you want to take the risk or I'll get the reward? I assume you want to take the risk because you're going to net more money doing that than if I do a fixed lease and I guarantee the rent. And people will ask me many times, well, how do you set the fixed rent that you're willing to pay? And let me just walk you through that for a second, because I think that's germane. The first thing I would tell you is if you're starting out, it's much safer to start out, in my opinion, with a performance lease, because you only owe money if you collect money. So that's a better way to start. But let's say you're dealing with someone who's adverse to risk. You're dealing with someone that's got the insurance that covers every appliance in their house. It will, the Sears and Roebuck policy, that whatever it is, and they're just adverse to any risk, and they just want to know what their negative cash flow is going to be each month. Forget positive cash flow. They want a figure. And so you agree to do a fixed lease. I usually have them back into the figure, and it's very, very simple to do. Of course, I'll start with market rent, because the market sets the rent. You and I don't set the rent. The market always is changing. The market sets the rent, and you need to know the market. So the market sets the rent, and then I'll say, okay, now the market sets the rent. The rent is this, I think, and it's usually a range, but I'm pretty close. And then I say, okay, so I'm not doing this for my health. So how much should we take off of that for management? And you'd be absolutely amazed. 9 times out of 10 in my town, they always say, well, I guess 10%. And then you say, okay, so how much should we take off for maintenance? Well, I don't know, maybe 10%. Well, how much for vacancy? Well, they start to slow down. You know, they see the way this is going. And so then, and you get those 3, and then you say, well, there's one more category that I'm eligible for, and that's profit. If I'm willing to take on the risk of paying your rent, whether the house is vacant or full, I'm eligible to take profit. So how much do I rent it for? Well, it depends how long my lease is for. You know, my 35-year lease, the first year or 2, I lost money. Why did I lose money? Well, because I put in the yard, I put in the sprinkler system, I put in new carpet, I painted the house outside and in, I got it right. Now, I didn't have to pay all of that. My contract limited how much I had to pay for. But my deal was I had a good enough deal in this thing. I never wanted to call the owner or anything to do with this property. That's why he gave it to me. He didn't want to have to mess with it anymore. And we were friends. We met and did other things. He sold me another house, and he carried all the financing on the other house at 0% interest in second position on a third house. So he gave me a house free and clear. So, I mean, it's not like I wasn't making other transactions, but hopefully that answered your question, that you have to start with what do the owners need, give them what they need, and take the rest. If they want less than 3 years, I don't want to do business with them. I'll send them to someone else. If I don't like the owners, I'll send them to someone else. If I don't like the property, I'll send them to someone else. If I like them, if I like their property and they're willing to do at least 3 years, no problem. I'll take them on, or would. Now I'm old. Now I only deal with my stuff pretty much. I do have a couple of old 30-year master leases.
Okay. You're really not that old, David, Tilney. My goodness. Okay, let's see here.
Mine is going.
Here's one that all right, let's see what I got here for you. Here's one. Would I need to be licensed to manage a friend's house in the state of Georgia under an LLC?
If you're not an employee of the LLC, you need to be licensed, I'm sure. I'm sure you do. But can you master lease it? Of course you can. It's a different deal. Don't manage it, master lease it.
There you go.
Now let me add on that. Let me add on that, because there was a case in Georgia that an individual came to my class, and he did everything wrong. First of all, I created a website that said he would manage your property. Well, you can't manage property if you're not licensed in Georgia, and he wasn't licensed. And then he dealt with an attorney. He master leased their property, or managed, whatever, and he messed up big time. And the attorney ultimately turned him into the Georgia Real Estate Commission, whatever it is. And they tried to say that a performance lease they could deem was agency. How they could do that, I don't know. But they started to say that. So I had to create a new hybrid lease that was really a lot of fun to create, because you know, Miller used to say, if they want to see the blue suit, turn on the blue light. You have a gray suit, turn on the blue light. It makes it blue. And so I created this lease that had all these funny things in it that looked like I agreed to pay them a big sum of money over 3 years or something. But if you did the math, it was the smallest amount a month that you'd ever believe. And I had so much, I had like 60 days in arrears to pay the rent without a penalty. And it just kind of went on and on. But there were a few things in there that were important to add, I think. Like we had checkoffs as to who pays the utilities during vacancy, who pays for advertising during vacancy. And it was just a checkoff. And I think all you have to do is do something that a management company won't do. And, you know, maybe the advertising doesn't cost you much. Maybe if I go in 90% of the time, I go from a tenant to a tenant with no downtime, doesn't cost me much to pay the utilities. Maybe I agree to pay the first $50 of anything that goes wrong in a month, you know, to take care of it in the house. Well, my occupant tenant has agreed to pay $75 of anything that goes wrong in a month. So anytime something goes wrong, I make 25 bucks. I mean, you just got to use your mind and draft by design and not by default. But can you master lease on a performance basis in Georgia? Yeah, you darn well can. And can you do it on a fixed base? Absolutely. Can you manage without a license? No, don't do that. You can't do that here either.
What happened when people blew fresh grass out onto the street?
That's excellent, because these are the kind of things that we learn in your class, David, that, I mean, people do not realize we have 2 or 3 days with you of amazing amounts of information just like this, like these little tiny things that can make all the difference in the world in any of our transactions. It's just so awesome. Sorry, that wasn't a question, but I couldn't help myself.
It's so much fun. It's really fun. This is a great business.
I know you really, really have taught me that above anything else, that you really make it that way. And I just love it.
So here's my question to you, Liz. Have you master leased some property?
Okay, so here's my answer to you. So I think whenever I first started coming to your class, I told you and shared with you that most of my tenants are in the medium to low income, and that some people had told me that they weren't sure that your system could work in that lower end client. So what I did is I started as slowly but surely as tenants have been moving out. I've been changing some of those techniques. I just want you to know that up front. That's not master leasing, but that's your lease system that you do.
That's great.
Yes, and I have found it to be very, yes, absolutely. In fact, my whole system changed from them being a tenant to them being a homeowner. In my mind, that's how I start speaking to them. That's how I create my relationship with them, so that they start feeling like that really is their home. And that has made an incredible difference in just everything I've done. So for that, I'm so grateful. On the master lease thing, I have only one master lease that I've done. And I really believe that's only, well, thank you. I appreciate you being celebratory about that. I feel like I kind of let you down a little bit, because I should have more than one set up right now. But it's only because I haven't been actively going after it. So you're re-establishing my excitement about it tonight, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I
just have the one.
I think many people will find it's easier to pick up a lease than it is to pick up ownership, and it's just the first step towards ownership.
I have two.
Adrian, did you have something?
Yeah, I have 2 testimonials for the 2 classes that Dave teaches on the how to manage your properties. When I finally switched over, I think it was maybe a year and a half after taking the class, to David's system. In short, I believe the lady took the property because she knew what her potential rent increases could be for the rest of the time she was going to be there, because of the way David teaches us to do it. And one of the reasons I believe that's true is she moved out of a place because they raised her rent $250 a month. And she had to move 45 minutes away. She wanted to keep her daughter in the same school. So she was driving 45 minutes each way to keep her daughter in school. And all she cared about through the 2 hours of lease signing was what her lease could potentially raise every year for the rest of the time she was going to be there. And it was almost like David set her up for me. It was perfect. And then for the master lease, it was January. We got a call, and the long story short, the title is so screwed up it would probably cost more to repair the title than the home is worth. And they actually were about to give up and just give it to taxes. And for whatever reason, they called me and we talked, and long story short, we did a master lease, and I'm getting $390 or so a month from the master lease. They're collecting money. So I've made my money back on the class within a few months. So it's been awesome.
You know, one of the things that I don't like about the California law that I mentioned is here you've got the state giving things that we typically give, you know, that the rent can only go up 3% plus the CPI. That's a benefit that we've been able to sell. And so I had to figure out new benefits and some changes. But, you know, I really, the business has changed a lot with the change in laws. I really see it sweeping from the West over. Seattle, well, I mean, all kinds of places. Minneapolis, you can't use credit reports anymore. Seattle, you got to do first come, first served. You can't do best qualified. There's so many things, and you got to fight it as a group that gets together and owns rental properties. You got to pay attention to what laws are coming up, and you got to pay attention and jump in there and raise Cain and rally the troops. There's just nothing more important.
Hey, David, there's a good friend of ours in the group that I actually met at my first class with you, Anthony Green. He's on the, I think, Adrian, we need to unmute him. He's listed as Anthony, Anthony two-time attendant. Do you see that? Okay,
Yep, he's
so let's
good.
unmute Anthony. Okay, Anthony, go for it.
Hello there. Hi there, David. And hi there, Liz, as well. Yeah, I met you at one of my David Tilney seminars, so thank you so much for adding so much value. Thank you, Liz. David,
Thank you.
I know, man, you blow my mind tonight, and I've been to your class twice, so thank you so much. I do got a question that I think would benefit others as well as me, and I know I do ask you this question quite a lot, but you do give me different answers each time because that's just the way you roll, which I'm thrilled with. So, and you just give it out of your experience. And so the question is, now that even we don't know where the economy is going, and even we don't know who can pay and who can't, I do feel that performance leases certainly there'll be more appetite for those. And I just wondered, are there any ways that you would be able to advise us to, certainly given now that we're in this crash period, you know, how we can best propose those, best secure those, best not sell those, but figure out whether that can help out the owner. That would be awesome if you could give me some ideas about that, David. Thank you. And thank you again for an amazing seminar. I appreciate it.
Well, I do think that
David, wait, can you repeat that question? Because some people couldn't hear Anthony very well.
You know, he's concerned, not knowing where the economy is going and what's happening, that he thinks a performance lease is probably the safest way to do master leasing right now. And my thoughts and how to put those together safely is kind of what I got out of it, I think. And what I would say is that I think there's going to be an incredible opportunity down the road. Why? I think it's going to take a while, but I think housing is going to crash and burn. And there's going to be folks that have houses that they just don't want to have. And they may not make sense to buy right away, but you might be able to lease them. And I think, you know, Peter Fortunato's on here, I saw, and he only does fixed master leases. And fixed master leases are fine too, as long as you have a safety escape that you can get out of them. So either one works. I always start with the needs of the owner. Start with the owners first. What do they need? What's the situation? Let me give you some other sources that I think will come up. Think about this for a minute. You've got these loans that will pay 250% of your 1 month's salary cost for your employees, but that's going to end at some point in time. So now you got some big property management companies. I mean, people that have 600-700 doors, and they can't screw down their overhead fast enough. They've got lots of salary costs. They got rents that they're paying on their office. They got all kinds of costs. I think property management companies are going to get burned. And in the process, you're going to have all these owners that don't want to deal with tenants and toilets or aren't in town, that it's another opportunity for you, I think. How do you find those guys? Well, you see where they advertise their stuff for rent, be it Zillow or on their company sites. But I'd start looking at some of that stuff. I know of 2 management companies that I know, one that closed down recently and another one that I think is sold out. So it's starting. And I think that's, well, just think of all the businesses that are going under. This is a very, very unusual time that, you know, I've always made more money in a down market than an up market. And clearly there's going to be a down market. I don't think it's there yet. I wouldn't go too fast. But, you know, with a lease, with your drafting it, if you're doing performance, I don't see how you can get hurt as the market goes up, down, and sideways. So what? You pay more or less, or however it works out. And on a fixed lease, just make sure you have an escape clause that you can get out. If we have a worldwide depression, you want to be able to get out if you need to. Did that answer anything, Anthony?
Thanks
Ask
so
it
much
again.
for
If it
asking.
didn't answer, hit me again.
When they're hung up about the money and they just want the money, and I'm not in a position to guarantee it, just any further thoughts about where to take it? You know, it's just to follow up, or to. I mean, you've actually given some very good points tonight, but like backing down to a figure, and Pete's very good get out of jail clause. Also, I guess, you know, give me 60 days rent free to find you a tenant. That's always an option as well. Anything else that comes to mind? Otherwise, yeah, perfect. I'm really gonna, and I'll hopefully listen back to this and get the wisdom in it. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, will you be able to make a deal with everyone that has a problem? Maybe not. Maybe not. And so you need to acknowledge that up front. And do you want to with everyone? But I think, you know, you just mentioned some of it. You can say your lease starts 30 days after you have a tenant. So you can do that kind of thing. But if you're dealing with someone who's risk adverse, and so they want a guaranteed rent, I think you're not going to give them a performance lease. You have to give them a guaranteed rent. But you got to give them a guaranteed rent that says that, you know, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to guarantee the rent. But I'd look them in the eye and I'd say, if we have a worldwide depression, I'm out of here. And so I need to protect myself on that. And I'd make it look dark. And, you know, we might have a worldwide depression. What the heck? Or we might have rampant inflation, or we might have both. But so you just, you know, under promise, over perform, but give them what they want. I'll give you a fixed lease. I may only pay you for 1 month, but I'll give you a fixed lease.
Perfect. Thank you. Oh my God, it just fell into place. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Liz.
Nice to see you.
Great question, Anthony. My goodness, excellent. See, I love it. I love it when we can ask questions of guys and girls that have been in this for a long time, and they can give us different answers every time we ask. I love that. You never know. All right, so we're going to ask a couple of more questions. Then we'll ask if anyone else has something else. We'll wrap it up for the night. But remember now, we are going to keep on with the meeting after the meeting for anybody that would like to stay. So the last couple of questions I have for you, David, are, let's see, here we go. What are the 3 top things that you're looking for when you're choosing a tenant? There are some typical things, I understand, but are there some things that you might be looking for that are a little bit unusual that we don't always look for in a potential tenant, since you have a different system that you use?
Well, I'm going to pull up something I did the other day for Advana had me on, talking about navigating COVID-19 with your tenants. And I wrote down some ideal tenant character traits that I'm looking for. And you got to figure out how to find these, but because they don't fill in a blank that you can find them real quickly by off an application. You have to do a lot of things to figure it out. But the ideal tenant character traits that I wrote down are, number 1, they got to be honest. They got to be responsible. They got to be show stability, and by that I mean stability with their job. They're not going to move in and move out the next day. They got to be good stewards of good property stewardship. I put down, and they got to be trustworthy. they got to be respectful, and they got to be appreciative of what we're offering them. You know, we're offering good housing to folks. If they don't appreciate what we're offering, how can I do business with them? So how do you find some of these things? Well, I mean, for me, the number one thing I do is credit reports. I do look at FICO scores, and some places you can't do that anymore. So make sure what your rules are. But that concerns me when it changes that we can't do that, because FICO score shows me that they are responsible. It shows me that credit's important to them. It shows me they do, at least in that aspect of their life, what they say they're going to do. Responsibility, you know, you can see what they've done with prior landlords. Our whole application and the whole process and going through the lease up, those are the things I'm really looking for in a tenant. Now, when I gave this little talk the other day, I really flipped that around. And what I said is, you know, the traits you're looking for in your tenant, that's the traits they're looking for in you as a landlord. And landlords don't think about that. They want you to be honest. They want you to be responsible. They want you to be stable, that they're not going to move in and you're going to sell the house out from underneath them or have it foreclosed out from underneath them. They want you to be a good steward of the property, that you take care of it and don't run it into the ground. They want you to be trustworthy. They want you to be respectful and show appreciation for the tenant. So those things are things we just want in people we do business with, period. And I would say one of the great things about this business is it's not McDonald's. McDonald's, you have to deal with every customer that comes in the door. You know, government makes it tougher and tougher all the time, but we still do get to decide within reason who we want to do business with. We can't violate a fair housing law, and why would we want to? We just want to do business with good folks. You know, and so think that through. And I think if you view your tenants as employees you're hiring to do a job, that changes how you analyze applicants. It really does, because you're not looking for someone who will just pay you the rent. You're looking for the best of the best. You know, I always kid around and say, well, we're kind of like the Marines. We're looking for a few good men. And you know, once we have someone we think may work, and I call them up and I say, is this your first choice house? And they say, oh yeah, we really want it. And I say, well, you rose to the top. Now, from our standpoint, nothing counts until contracts are signed and money changes hands. So we're still showing it, but we'd love to offer you a contract. When can we get together in the next 24 hours? I want to get them off the street. And I don't take any deposit to hold it. I collect an amount equal to twice the first month's rent right up front, one being rent and one being we sell them something. But, you know, money is an economic qualifier. You want the money, you want the contract signed, you want it done. Even if the contract doesn't start for 6 weeks down the road, get them off the street, get it signed, get their money. And that process of going through your rental contract, you're looking for those traits. Do they pay attention as you're going through? Or do they read ahead and say, we just want to sign it and get out of here? That's the wrong guy. Do they ask you questions? Do they disagree? Well, we don't like that. I want people to take me on. If people take me on, I can take their objections and turn them into benefits. If no one asks a word and is quiet the whole time, I can't read them as well. I can't tell how they're going to be. So that people skill part, you know, you said I was a psych major. I think that stuff really helps you to be able to kind of analyze what you're looking for. And if you're in this business long enough and you keep working on your business, you'll get better at it all the time. And when you fail, as long as you internalize, and you really should internalize and say, it's not their fault. I hired them. I hired the wrong guy. What did I do wrong? I didn't share expectations. They didn't have the right skill set. You know, they didn't have the right moral code and I missed it. How can I change my systems to be better the next time? If you do that, you'll get better and better, and you'll hire better people to do a job for you.
I know, David, when I went to your class, one of the things that I learned when you were doing a great example up on stage, you know, of how you interview your folks. And one of the things that I caught was that you asked the gentleman and his wife, you asked him, by the way, do you happen to own a lawnmower? And that was not a question I've ever asked a tenant before in my life. But as soon as you said it, I thought, wow, right there. If they have a lawnmower, they can take care of their yard. If they don't, then I could have a potential problem. So I started changing mine a little bit. And when I ask them that, if they don't have one, then I suggest that until they get one, if everything else is great about them, then what I do is I suggest that we can hire a lawn service until they have one. And so I just add that onto their rent. It's like $30 or something, a mowing. Anyway, that really helped me and completely changed things, just in that one simple little thing.
Yeah, I have two comments on that because we're always working on our business. One is I have a white collar house with a guy that lives in it, single guy, great furniture, everything's fine. And he moved in and he called up and he raised Cain with me. He said, "What are you going to do with all the dog hair around?" I said, "What do you mean? All the carpets were clean." "Well, but the hardwood floors, there's dog hair on them. I'm crawling around on my stomach with a towel cleaning it up. It's taken hours." I said, "Well, why didn't you vacuum it?" "Vacuum? What's a vacuum?" I couldn't believe it. White collar guy. So now in our applications, we ask, do you have a vacuum? Do you have a mop? We have lawnmowers in there, yard tools you own, skill set. We've got all that stuff in. So we're constantly changing. I'll give you another example. We did a rehab. We do a lot of big rehabs while they're tenant occupied. And this was with a tenant I had for over 10 years. And it was a big rehab, meaning we knocked out walls, took out the kitchen, took out the master bath, changed it all around, and she had to camp out for 6 months and pay rent while we did this. And in the process, we absolutely discovered once we started that she was an absolute slob. We actually found dog feces in one room, and it was tough. And so I thought, what the heck am I going to do? Because I put all this money into this rehab. And so how was I going to, if she put up with this while we were doing it and protected our materials where we were doing it for 6 months or whatever it was, now I drop kick her, that just doesn't sit well with me. So instead I offered her a new contract and I raised the rent dramatically. And it warranted raising it because it was quite a change. I raised it like $370 or something a month. But in that lease that I raised it, I then included a housekeeper at my expense that came twice a month. And that was a solution to my problem, that I had someone there making sure that it was being maintained. So now I'm just putting out new contract. This is 2 years later. For 2 years I did that. 2 years later, I'm now giving her a new contract that, as I said, the rent's not going up. But I've got some language in there in the contract. Well, I can read it to you, in fact, if I can find it. I got it right here. Hold on, I'll tell you how I'm solving this. Tenants, hold on a sec. 2020. Here we go. So on this one now, I'm trying to. I wanted the housekeeper to change the way she ran in the house. So here's what I put this time. I put, as a condition of this contract, tenants and landlords agree that my cleaning company will professionally clean the residence twice a month for the entire term of the contract at landlord's expense. Then if it's ever determined that once a month cleaning is sufficient based upon the recommendation of my cleaning company, then the rent due for the subsequent month will be reduced by $110 because it cost me $110 a time for the cleaning. So again, I'm trying to reward her to get back, and it's kind of like your person getting them on a lawn service until they get the lawnmower. But we learn from our errors. We learn and we get better. Do the autopsies. Make your business better all the time.
Wow. Okay. I'm so excited. I'm typing everything down that you say over here on my notes. All right, let's see. One more, and then maybe we'll wrap it up and then go to our after meeting. So this person is asking. Oh, good. Okay.
Hi, David.
Go ahead, Wade.
Two questions. One is way early on, you said something, and I think you were talking about property management versus leasing, and I don't quite remember, but Could you expound on that? And then the other one was, the second question is, every time, is that how you're talking about the different leases that you do, one toward the owner and one toward the tenant? I'm assuming that you like customize them every time, but I'm assuming that you probably have like a template that you start with the basics that's going to be on no matter what each lease each time, and you sort of fill in the blanks as you go, or how do you do that? And is that how do you do that? So
Well, your answer to your first question, I've got to apologize, but I don't have any idea what you're referring to. So you got to give me more information. The answer to the second question is that, yeah, I mean, my performance leases are all pretty similar. They're all pretty similar. I charge about I pay the owner about the same percentage, give or take. They're pretty similar. The fixed leases, they're pretty similar, but do they change? Yes, I really do listen to the owners, and I really do modify based on what the owners tell me. But clearly, I've got something in Word. I start with something I've got, and I change a paragraph or add a paragraph. We changed a lot last year, so last fall, before we did a seminar on the West Coast, and we're because of the laws in Colorado, we had to change them. And so, this year sending out renewals to our tenants, and our first year rental contract is different from our subsequent year rental contracts. These is with our occupant tenants. And so, yeah, I start with something, and I don't just start with a blank piece of paper and start over. I copy paragraphs and add and create new paragraphs, and that's the way I do it. Now, if you can come up with what you wanted me to understand on the first question, I'll try, but I couldn't. I'm not sure what you were referring to.
I thought you said something like, if you change what you call yourself from a property manager to one who holds a lease.
Okay, maybe you're talking about when I started out in '81. I was a licensed real estate broker in the state of Colorado. And since I was managing my properties, I held myself out as a licensed property manager and managed other people's properties. And I did that until October 1st of 1996. And in 1996, I canceled every agency relationship I had with my owners. And I turned around and leased the properties I used to manage and subleased them and took a spread. And I was absolutely convinced it was better for them and better for me. And I sent him a letter that showed him why I was doing it and why it was better for both of us. And it all worked out fine. Now, I had one owner that I had two properties that I was running for her. And she said, I don't want to play. And I called her up and I said, I can't think of her name right now. She's no longer alive. But I said, listen, you know me and I know you. We've been doing business for a long time. Let's just try it. If it doesn't work, I'll put it back. But let's just give it a try. And she tried it, and I picked up more houses from her, so it worked fine. But I honestly do believe, if I if I lose my mind totally and I can't manage my own anymore, I don't want to hire a manager. I don't want the liability of a manager working for me. I want to lease my properties to someone else who will take care of them. That's a much better way to do it. Deal with an entrepreneur. I'm absolutely convinced it's a better way to do business.
So right now, of course, I own my own company, and I'm at the office right now. I spend a lot of time at the office.
Are you a property manager?
No. I have an outsourced IT company for small businesses, and I'm wanting to transition into real estate, and I need to do it. I need to figure out a way to do it because I don't have a lot of time. So I've always had in my mind that to acquire property and have a property manager manage it. And what I hear you saying is clearly that's not the best way. But in terms of me not having time, how do I do that where I don't spend a lot of time?
I mean, all I can do is tell you, I don't spend much time on it. I mean, one day a month, I reconcile the bank statements and I'm essentially done. I really was in Southeast Asia for most of February. I flew through Hong Kong. The next day they stopped flights to Hong Kong from the US, went to Bangkok, then went to Vietnam, then Cambodia, and then ended up in Singapore. So we had a lovely time. But I took my wife and kids around the world one summer, and I did have one employee then, but we didn't have any problems. Yeah, well, I mean, the problem came up, but it wasn't my problem. Someone moved out of a house up a hill from my house, and they had a car without a parking brake on it, rolled down the hill across a road intersection into my wall of my garage and wiped out a bunch of the wall of my garage. My tenants weren't there. Tenants come home. They don't speak, the wife doesn't speak any English, husband does. The fire department's there. The wife thought maybe they left the stove on or something. So they didn't know what to do. So they got the lease. It told them who to call. They called the handyman. The handyman squared it all away. Before I came back, the people whose car wiped out my garage, they got their insurance involved. They rebuilt my garage. Everything's squared away. By the time I get home, no problem at all. So, I mean, there's not a lot of moving parts if you set it up right, but you do have to set up the systems. They're important. I don't know, people don't believe me how easy management is. I mean, I really am, I don't work very hard.
What kind of time commitment do you think that he would have to get to acquire the types of property, since he's just starting out getting clients and that, if he were to, set aside that amount of time? What would
That's a good question. And it depends on how you're going to do it. For me, I did it slowly. I mean, I still was doing some acquisition brokerage on the side. I had several little sources of income. For a little bit, I sold disability insurance. So I had some funds coming in there. The problem was I kept buying houses and I kept saying, well, why the heck am I in the insurance business? So I got out of the insurance business and just kept buying houses. I think it's good to have sources of income. I also sold property management software while I was doing some of this, which was great because I was a user. I was a beta tester. I had a direct line with the developers, and I could give them my Christmas wish list and it would come out in the next version of the software. So all that kind of work. So I would say, keep your day job, your day business, as you build this up a little bit. I think if you do it too fast and furious, it's hard to get everything right really quickly. To take on 25 properties on day one, that's tough. You can buy someone's business, but I wouldn't recommend that. I think you're going to stub your toe a little bit. There is going to be some hard knocks. If you have the ability to keep an income stream going while you build it up, I'd recommend doing that.
Would you,
Thank you, David.
Yep.
David, would you possibly recommend to Wade for him to, since he maybe can purchase properties right now, but he doesn't have the time to really oversee the management, or he's nervous about that he could actually master lease out to someone like me, or but someone in this group, and then let them do that part of it?
Clearly he could do that, but I mean, if he doesn't own one rental and he's got to start with one. And the John Schaub approach says, just get one. Don't go for 10. Get one. And if you get one, I'd say manage the one. You can manage one. I don't care how tough it is. You can figure out how to manage one. I think you need to see the management business, with one before you hand it off to someone else. So you know what they're going through. You know the problems that they're dealing with. And you know how to rate them based on how they deal with the people skills. Because it is a people business. Does that make sense?
Yes, and so from what I'm heard you say, it's a lot easier to manage a master lease than it is to own a piece of property, or am I hearing you right? It's easier to start with a master lease anyway.
I would say it's a lot less risky because think of the guys. Mike Cantu had something that he taught, which was just, I love the title. It said, "Don't get voted off Real Estate Island." Being on Real Estate Island is a lot of fun, but you don't want to get voted off Real Estate Island that you can't play anymore. And there are a lot of guys that bought properties at the wrong time and they got voted off Real Estate Island. They can't do it anymore. So a master lease, you don't get voted off. A performance lease, how are you going to get hurt? I'd say go for it. Yeah, lease it first and you test drive it, do all those things, get to know the owners. Then you can buy it from them. Then they'll carry the finance. There's so many good things that come out of it. If you do it once and you hate it, don't ever do it again. Hire a manager, do something else. But I think you won't find it's as tough as people make it sound, especially if you're leasing, because you're getting good properties, not the ones you can afford to buy, perhaps. Okay. There's
Very
a
good.
question.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Chris.
Is there any good property management program or book or class that can help you with your policies and procedure manual, your system to set up, your ways to start your first tenant?
Funny you should ask. I mean, you get everything I do in my business at my class. I mean, my manual is, I don't know, it's, 300, it's a lot. And you get it all. I mean, at least you see how I do mine. And you see my policy procedure manual. You see all that stuff. But I don't know. No one wants to teach management because, when I told Jack Miller I wanted to teach management, he taught management. He said, yeah, you can definitely teach it because you do it and you can do it. But he said, it will break your heart. No one will come. And if they come, no one will implement. And being the kind of guy I am, I wanted to prove them wrong. I think it's the most important course out there, really. And I think people have implemented, and we give them some extra tools that we don't tell them about when they come. But I mean, since you're asking, we have a couple private invite-only Google groups, and the only way you get on them is if you've been to the class. And that's a great tool. It doesn't cost me a dime, so it doesn't cost you a dime, but you got people all over the country that when you have a problem, you can present something and someone will come up with a potential solution. And so, we really want you to be successful. I don't want to sell, glorified bookends that sit in a bookcase and never get used. I want to know that people are using some of it. But yeah.
David, we took the basis of your company policy and then obviously transformed it for what we do. And it made that process a lot easier and less intimidating to have a base to start with and be like, well, we like this, we don't like this, this is what we do. And we don't just have it sitting there. That's what we actually do. We do our company policy. So it's not just a piece of paper. It's great.
And it's a living document that changes as things change. And as much as you hated it, aren't you glad you had to physically type it out and read it and understand what was in there?
Yes. And that's what you make us do from the class. And I was a little frustrated when you first said that. And once I did it, I'm like, I'm so glad you made us actually do it. Because when I did my master lease, like in yours, you say that you give them a copy of your company policy.
Yeah, I do.
Well, if I hadn't already done that exercise, I would have no idea. That would have been a very scary time to try to learn all that and create a company policy to then hand them. And yeah, all we did before that is we updated it. There was a few small things we were doing differently.
Yeah, and I just want to point out again about that Google group. You quickly mentioned that, David, but I found that being a part of your class, we automatically get to be a part of that Google group, and that can be amazingly valuable. You have a very, very active, almost one of the most active Google groups I've ever seen. You can post anything, and there are people all over this country about almost any subject, and they will answer you, and they're involved. They're absolutely a part of it. I mean, it's a beautiful thing.
Including a lot of the people he mentioned at the beginning that have done a lot of different, very creative things. I know Matt Funk he's really active in there.
Yeah, he's very active.
I think Ginger has a question.
I usually don't mention that because I'd much rather underpromise and overperform and create extra value. But anyway, I think it's a great tool.
Did you say Ginger has a question,
Ginger.
Adrian?
I just unmuted you, Ginger.
Hello, guys. Thank you, Mr. Tilney, for your wonderful program. I've learned so much tonight, though I kind of got in late. And thank you, my wonderful ladies, friends. I'm sorry, I'm driving. Adrian, Ms. Liz, and Susan for being wonderful, wonderful friends and giving me all their love and support and coaching me into the program. Now, I'm a military spouse and I'm moving all the time from state to state. Would your program help me throughout the different states? I love to join and learn more about it.
So let me make sure I heard you. Did you say you're in the military and move around?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Colorado Springs, as you probably know, is a military center. I mean, we've got an Army base, an Air Force base, a North American Air Defense Command, CSOC. We've got Air Force Academy, a lot of military. So a lot of the people I master lease from were military that were moved out of the community, and you know, they wanted to be able to come back and keep their houses. A number of those folks ended up buying houses every place they went, and then they held on to them. And it was a great way for them to have something in their retirement other than just the military retirement. So yeah, I think there's a great opportunity for you there.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, let me just add, I'll just give you a cute story on that. There's so many stories when you're in this business. We ran into some young officers that graduated from the Air Force Academy, and they were absolutely wonderful people. They took great care of the place and everything was fine. And they ultimately got shipped out to various places. And one of them called me back at a later time, and he was in Florida at the Space Center, and he was being moved to Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C., the housing was a lot more expensive, and he wanted to pick up something there, and he couldn't sell his house where he was. So I got Jack Miller on the phone with him, and we talked to him about how to best negotiate to purchase the house that he wanted in Washington, D.C. And we actually had him take a video of his family to show a young family with nice kids. And he was in the Air Force, and the house he wanted to rent was a military family. And we had him overnight it to them. And lo and behold, he got the house at a lower price than someone else had offered to pay. So it worked. And we showed him how to manage the house he had. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, he came back and went through my seminar. And I always wondered, how would it be for a former tenant to see the curtain pulled back and see how behind the scenes, how everything worked? It worked great. It worked actually great. And he bought some more houses. And I know that my son-in-law ran one of them for a while. I don't know if he doesn't tell me what he's got anymore. So I don't know if he still has it or not. And because when he was down at the Space Center, you know, he invited us down, and we got to be VIPs at one of the lifts off, which was a lot of fun. We got to sit in that area. But so you get a lot of, it's just fun business. Everything's fun.
Excellent. Okay, this last question, and then we'll go into our happy hour after meeting kind of thing, is, can you touch on a little more detail on how or what you offer to tenants to guarantee them that you will not raise their rent, and for what period of time do you offer that?
We sell our first year tenants, when they sign the lease, a first right of refusal option to renew their rental contract at the end of the initial term, with an agreement that if they've done everything they're supposed to do right and the property is available for rent, that the gross rent won't go up more than 10%. Doesn't mean it will go up 10%, and it won't go up 10%. In most cases, it'll go up a lot less. But that tells them it's going to go up, and then when it goes up less, they're happier. And we charge them an amount equal to 1 month's rent for that. So that's how we get the amount equal to twice the first month's rent. Now, we title that, we stole Peter Fortunato's title for that document. We now call it a rent lock. And that's what it does. It locks the rent after the first period. Since it's a first right of refusal option, it means it's a limited option. It's only an option. They only have the right if the property is available for rent, if we make it available for rent. If something changes and we die, or, you know, we got to sell the house, it won't be available, of course. But then we also offer a performance bonus that says we'll take as good care of the tenants as they do of us once they move out. We'll write a check to all the parties who sign the rental contract within 14 days after they move out. And the performance bonus can be any amount. It can be an amount greater than the first month's rent, equal to, lesser than, or nothing based on how they performed. We find the carrot works infinitely better than the stick. Most people use the stick to get tenants to do what they want. The carrot, where they don't know what they're going to get, is a big difference. Now, do we really have a disguised security deposit? No, we really don't, because our tenants do much, much better under our system than they ever would under a security deposit. We typically pay a performance bonus greater than their current month's rent when they move out. And remember, I've had tenants who've stayed with me long term, so the rent's gone way the heck up. But if they can make it so that I can go from a tenant to a tenant with zero downtime and no costs, they're pretty tremendous. They save me so much money over time, and they're just wonderful people. So that's the way we do it.
Fantastic.
I
Now that
have
right there. Wow.
I have a tenant that I did not tell that to when they moved in, and they were supposed to be moving out earlier this year. And I mentioned it to them, that if they leave it nicer, I mentioned all that after the fact, right before they were supposed to be moving out, because they do not have a deposit. And so he's stayed a little bit longer because of COVID and he couldn't find somewhere. And the place looks better now than it did the whole time he's lived there and before he moved in. He keeps sending me pictures of fixing up the yard and all these things.
Well, and that's Peter Fortunato, what he does also, and he's on the line here, but he does not tell them he's going to give them a performance bonus, or he does not write it in the contract in any way, shape, or form. He may have told them, I'm not sure. He can unmute and tell us. But so that works. It all works. You just want to treat people the way they want to be treated. And Adrian, you obviously had that tenant take your house and make it their home. He had pride in it, and that's what you want to have happen.
Yep, he was actually supposed to buy it, but he wants to move out of state.
Mm-hmm.
We have someone here asking when your next class is.
Well, the next one was going to be the last long weekend in this month in Tampa, and obviously we pulled the plug on that. We've got two things we're looking at. I don't mind sharing them. Neither of them are in stone, so we don't have any idea if either of them will work. But we thought we might do one in Colorado Springs near the end of September. That's where I raised my family. That's where our properties are. There's something that people kind of like to come to my town and see where I did business. It's also a wonderful place to be in the fall. The leaves are changing. Pikes Peak is there. A lot of fun things to do, and to be forced to go there as tax deductible, all I can tell you is people come. So we might do that. The other thing that, one of my sons-in-law is kind of a techie, John Bunka, and we've kind of whispered between us. I shouldn't say this, but we've been talking a little bit. He's pushing, I'm dragging my feet, but we're thinking, with the changes and things like Zoom and whatever, we might consider doing a virtual seminar, and we might do that, and it has to be quite different in the way we pull it all together. But I've always said I'd try anything one time, and I don't mind failing one. So we might do that. If we did that, it might be July timeframe, late June or July. So, we do have, my website is just my name, davidtilney.com. There is a place to put in an email there, I think, someplace. And if you want to be notified of things that we're doing, make sure we got your email address. I'm not involved in that, but my son-in-law is, and them, or else keep checking back. But we may do that. We may do that.
That sounds wonderful. And in fact, everyone that's in our world, PCREIA world, will definitely get the message out to everybody, even folks that were not on the list tonight, David. So whenever you get that, you let me know, and I'll make sure folks know about it.
Yeah, at my age, I'm kind of forgetful, so you may have to look. But hopefully I'll remember.
Okay, well, I'll take the initiative then and make sure, between Adrian and I, we'll make sure.
You're on our list, so you will get notified. Since you've been to the class, you're on the list, you'll know.
Oh, perfect. Okay, that'll work good. Let's see. Okay, I think we pretty much answered all the questions now. We're going to close up the meeting. I just want to say, and don't forget, you can stay on, and we encourage you to do that. Pete, I hope that you will stay on, and David both, just for at least a little while, because there's a couple of folks that would like to maybe touch base with you and ask a couple of more questions. But for all of you that would like to go ahead and end the meeting for this evening, we thank you so much for spending your time with us tonight. You could have certainly been somewhere else, and well, maybe you couldn't be somewhere else. So I'm just glad you're here regardless. What the heck am I saying? You had no choice, man.
Well, they could have been on a different Zoom call. There's so many of them.
That's true. There's one on massage therapy tonight. You could have been there. Who knew? But listen, we're truly grateful, and we hope you benefited from tonight. I can just about guarantee that you did. I know I certainly have. This has been a great evening that David generously shared with us tonight, because he certainly could have been doing something else, and he was here. There's nothing to sell, nothing to give, except some great information. And David, we just want to thank you so much for being with us here tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Now listen, now I know you guys know why I said he's one of the best educators that I have ever experienced. I know you experienced that yourself tonight. And another top educator that's on that hot list is Pete Fortunato. And he's going to be here on June 4th. So, you know, just don't forget that. Join us again. In the meantime, we're going to have about 4 or 5 other meetings between this month and next month that are going to be for members only. And we hope that you'll join us. And I want you to know something. If you join us and you don't like what you're experiencing, if you're not getting the quality of education that you need or want, then I guarantee it. I will personally guarantee it, and we'll be glad to give your money back. Just please be with us. And thank you again for joining us tonight. That concludes our regular meeting for the evening. Good night, everybody, and a great round of applause for David Tilney. Yeah.
Thanks.
Woo!